Discovery, go at throttle up. Discovery, go at throttle up.
Okay. Okay. Here we go. Saturday streaming. What's going on, everybody? How's everybody doing? Star one. Yep. Okay, so we got Starliner press conference. Starliner, a big update coming from NASA here momentarily. It's set to start at the top of the hour. Yeah, this is gonna be fun. Not. I'm having a good time. Not. So we'll see. Predictions before the presser. So here's the thing. Holding a press conference on a Saturday is not a good look. Not a good look. Like, the optics there can't be ignored. What I'm expecting is more. Forgive me for being cynical, guys. I'm sorry. I'm expecting a bunch of excuses. Dragon probably coming down on Dragon in February 2025. That's my guess. I'm sorry, guys. It's just that Saturday press conference. NASA never holds press conferences on Saturday. They never do this on the weekend. A government organization doing stuff on the weekend. Look, man, I'm optimistic, but there's optimism and then there's reading the situation. Wait, why is Saturday implying bad news? Guys, you release something on the weekend if you don't want it to gain traction in the news cycle. Yeah, that's what you release stuff on the week. That's why companies lay off. They announce layoffs on Fridays. So, it kind of gets swept under the rug because it's Friday and everybody wants to enjoy the weekend. Yeah. Mohawk, I don't think they would have waited if that was the case. But, yeah, once again, this Saturday press conference is not giving me much confidence in that NASA has solved the fault tree. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I don't mean to be a pain in the butt. Like, I know it's probably not the information that people want to hear, but... Hello from Russia. Privet. Privet, товарищ. Как дела? So, yeah, I know it's probably not the best information, but we'll see. Yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you? All right. So, okay, here we go. Your brother-in-law does payload verification for Boeing. Not sure he's close enough to sit and know what they will say. All right, we'll see. Feel bad for Butch and Sonny. Yeah, hey, they're test pilots. This is part and parcel, guys. They'll say that. Watch, Jake. They'll say that. This is part and parcel. They're test pilots. They were prepared to stay up there for longer than 8 days. That's what they'll say. The reality of the situation is that they were prepared to stay up there for 8 days, a little more than 8 days, maybe a month at best, not February 2025. That's the reality of the situation. Yeah, farm. It's just, I'm not, I don't really have much high confidence here because, like I said, the track record for NASA hasn't been good this year. For just getting stuff done. With the Artemis delays, defunding for Chandra, just pulling the plug on Viper randomly for like no apparent reason. I don't really have a whole lick of confidence here, but we'll see. We'll see. Bird Dog, hey, 70 months. Chandra got extended. Yep. That's good, Jim. I'm really happy. Hey, Nervous, what's going on? I'm really happy. I'm happy that that happened. But the fact that we even got to the point where it was like even close to being on the chopping block, really, like, that's unacceptable. Like, look, man, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't like the human space flight and the engineering aspect of it, but what the Science Mission Directorate does cannot be ignored. And I don't think, I've always said that, you know, fighting one against the other is stupid. All that does is get NASA less money. The infighting is going to kill us. Figuratively, not actually. You know, so I will, in that regard, I will always argue for more scientific missions. I'm not really, you know, I'm not really big into astronomy, but I understand the repercussions of canceling an X-ray spectrum telescope when you don't have a replacement. That is idiotic behavior, and it shouldn't have even been suggested. It shouldn't have even been suggested. That is ridiculous. Yeah, that's, dude, I love my human spaceflight stuff. Like, I want to, you know, NASA have their own lander, but I wouldn't want it at the expense of the Science Mission Directorate. I want more money for everyone. Viper's final test went through yesterday, per somebody from LinkedIn. I saw that, Cozy. Yeah. You had your coffee and you're ready to fight. Yep, oh yeah. I took my parents out to breakfast. They're down on the Cape today, so I took them for breakfast, and then I'm gonna go meet them later, and we're going to the beach after this, man. I actually gotta cut the lawn. Bacon, what's going on? Tell your folks I said hi. Yeah, they went, they went to the beach already. We'll see. Beach, won't you burn up? I don't burn up. NASA's late. Yep. Yeah, no, admit it, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. Unacceptable behavior. If the shenanigans that happen with Viper is also unacceptable. Somebody's playing games. And man, I'm gonna go right for the jugular. Someone's playing games because it's an election year, and that just, I really can't stand. I know that NASA is inherently a political entity, but I can't stand that bull crap leaking into NASA. I will not tolerate it, and neither should you. It's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Like, just straight up. Look, man, I get it, you know, the turmoil, I get it. Not with my space program, please. Not with my space program that I pay for. Absolutely not. No. No partisan nonsense. Dude. Man, that really pushed my buttons, man. Whew. We'll see what happens here. Don't fast forward. Save it for when Bill is talking. That's right, all systems. That's how this works. Makes me wonder where the incompetencies are. Boeing with a report that its engineers aren't qualified, or NASA for allowing it to go this far. Pandaroo, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know. And now, regarding Starliner, I can't say. We'll figure out that conclusion in a second. Look, man, everybody blames these contractors for milking NASA and, you know, having these completely inefficient programs that waste money and incentivize profit. They don't get anything done. Look, man, they're a company. They're companies. They're NASA should know that they're there to make money, especially in this day and age. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's, you know, some of these companies their moral compass might be a little screwed up, right? But also at the same time, I don't think NASA is absolvent of blame either. You have to hold these people accountable. If you don't, they're just going to keep milking you for cash. Because what incentive do they have to produce anything if you don't have a mission with no plan and you're not sure where the rocket's going to go and you don't know when you need it and you don't know when you're going to fly it? What's their incentive to be expedient in any way, shape, or form? Right? Look, man, you can sit here and say, oh, they're just there to profits and they don't... NASA, that's NASA's fault for not holding them accountable. I'm sorry, it is. Like, I hate talking bad about them. I really don't like it. I don't like doing this. But also at the same time... Hey, yes, what's going on? Look, man, I just... The behavior from them this past year, behavior from NASA, hey... This kind of behavior comes right from the top. I'm sorry. You're only as good as the person that leads your company. You know what I mean? You don't hear Gwen Shotwell making, saying the kind of stuff that Bill Nelson has been saying. You don't hear Tory Bruno saying stuff like that. You don't hear Jeff Bezos saying stuff like that. So what the hell? What's going on here? Educate you. Yeah, there you go. NASA is the anchor for all commercial space ventures and will be for years to come. No doubt, Soapbox, right? I just wish they held everybody's feet to the fire like they held SpaceX's feet to the fire. It's almost like they did that, and that's the reason why SpaceX's capsule is so damn good. Did NASA give a launch window for this press conference? Yeah, apparently it was net 1 o'clock, Andrew. Well, Hip, like I said, the behavior is unacceptable. And as much as I want to sit here and hype up NASA, they make it very difficult for me to do my job sometimes. And I don't like that. That's annoying. I don't want to sit here and be the bearer of bad news all frickin' day. What do you think we are expecting? Chimp, I'll be honest. A Saturday press conference for a government agency is not a good look. I'm kind of expecting worst case scenario here. Yeah, February 2025, Crew 9 2-seat contingency. That's what I'm expecting. This can't be ignored. NASA never does press conferences on Saturdays, dudes. The aerospace industry is all about noticing patterns. This is anomalous behavior in the pattern of NASA press conferences. Haven't been following what's basically happened to the guys in space right now. Okay, so if you guys are unfamiliar with this issue, I guess we have some leeway time to talk. Brent, thanks for the bits. Put space love back into your cargo bay. Yep. Starliner went up for a test flight in June with 2 astronauts aboard, Barry Wilmore and Sonny Williams. It was a test flight. They're test pilots. They got to the space station and were only supposed to stay up there for maybe a little bit over a week and then come back down. Okay? Give me 1 second. They're still up there. They launched in June, and NASA and Boeing appeared to be tracking some kind of fault with their thrusters. As far as I can tell, I mean, I've watched every press conference from the flight readiness review press conference right before they launched basically till now. Over the last 2 months, I've watched every single press conference without missing one. As far as I can tell, they're dealing with thrusters that are overheating. The thrusters are heating up too much inside of Starliner's service module. They're heating up so bad, and the thrusters are getting so hot so quickly that the computer didn't recognize that they got that hot that fast, and it did save the thrusters, but not before, at least what NASA thinks, they damaged them a little bit. Why do you need thrusters? Well, when they undock from the space station, they have to do a re-entry burn to come back down. You have to slow down enough so Earth's grav well will pull you back in. You can't do that if your thrusters don't work. Kind of an important thing. Now, here's the thing. NASA has a lot of leeway in the schedule. The next crew capsule, actually, the next crew capsule was supposed to launch pretty much right now, which the next crew capsule up was a SpaceX Dragon. It's Dragon Crew 9. NASA moved that to September. Because the ISS schedule and operations, there's leeway and there's overlaps in windows intentionally built in just in case you have a problem like this, right? But here's the thing. It's extremely difficult to diagnose a problem on a service module attached to a space station going 17,500 miles an hour around Earth, especially when you can't get your hands on it. Trying to inspect the service module at this point would be like trying to pop the hood off a car to work on the motor while you're driving down the road. It's just not a thing you're going to be able to do. I'm sorry, like you can't do that. So you have to kind of figure out what's going on from the dashboard, right? So NASA's been trying to figure it out, and it's been 2 months. So, well, here we go. Let's see what happens.
Good afternoon, and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space
Discovery,
Center.
go
I'm
at throttle up.
All right.
in NASA's Office of Communications.
Guys,
thank you for joining us today. And
what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shut up for the opening remarks of the press conference, and then we'll do the pause and try to answer questions thing once the press questions come back in. So let's see what happens. Mark Nappy isn't there.
Ken Bowersox, Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch, International Space Station Program Manager Dana Weigel, and Flight Operations Director Norm Knight. We'll be taking questions from those in the room and over the phone. As a reminder, you can press *1 to get into the queue. But first, I'd like to hand it over to Administrator Nelson for opening remarks.
Thanks.
All right, I'm shutting up.
NASA has decided that Butch and Sonny will return with Crew 9 next February, and that Starliner will return uncrewed, and the specifics in the schedule will be discussed momentarily. I want you to know that Boeing has worked very hard with NASA to get the necessary data to make this decision. We want to further understand the root causes and understand the design improvements so that the Boeing Starliner will serve as an important part of our assured crew access to the ISS. I have just talked to the new Boeing CEO, Kelly Ortberg. I have expressed this to him. I told him how well Boeing worked with our team to come to this decision. And he expressed to me an intention that they will continue to work the problems once Starliner is back safely, and that we will have our redundancy and our crewed access to the space station. This whole discussion, remember, is put in the context of we have had mistakes done in the past. We lost 2 space shuttles as a result of there not being a culture in which information could come forward. We have been very solicitous of all of our employees that if you have some objection, you come forward. Space flight is risky, even at its safest, and even at its most routine. And a test flight by nature is neither safe nor routine. And so the decision to keep Butch and Sonny aboard the International Space Station and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety. Our core value is safety, and it is our North Star. And I'm grateful to NASA and to Boeing for their teams, for all the incredible and detailed work to get to this decision. Turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, sir. Thank you and Deputy Administrator Melroy for your support along the way and certainly for being here today. It means a lot. I'd like to communicate to all of you that we've come to this decision using our program, our mission directorate, and our agency level processes. That includes the decisions that happen at the commercial crew program, at the space operations mission directorate level, and the agency level, and includes all of our technical authorities from engineering, safety, medical, and flight operations. As the administrator said, our focus is on safety all the time, and this certainly is no different. The uncertainty in our margins is where we have come to make the decision that the administrator laid out. That uncertainty remains in our understanding of the physics going on in the thrusters, and we still have some work to go. You'll hear more from others on the specifics, but I'll tell you that the NASA and Boeing team have made incredible technical progress in the model development that has gone on, the thruster testing, understanding material properties within the valve, and the complicated fluid physics that are happening inside. We will continue to learn. We are a learning organization, and I think we've demonstrated that here. We'll learn from this effort so that our crews who are at the top of the pyramid on these missions and their families can continue to know we've done that and we'll always do our best. For our team, our programmatic and technical teams, both NASA and the Commercial Crew Program, in the Space Station Program, and our Boeing teammates have worked endlessly to get to launch, and certainly in the past 2 months. They've done this while the whole world has gone on around them. A hurricane through Florida, a hurricane through here, while their homes are damaged and without power, they came to work. Some of them lost family members along the way. Their kids went back to school and life in general went on, but they were here every day working long hours. They have persevered, and I want them to know how grateful I am that they are on our team. This has not been an easy decision, but it is absolutely the right one. Let me turn it over to Ken Bowersox and thank Ken and all the leaders here and the ones that are not here with us today for their work.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to you and the administrator for joining us for this press conference and for our meetings. You guys have been heavily involved, and we appreciate that. I also want to thank everybody who's here in the room with us and watching online. It says a lot that you're with us on a Saturday, and I want you to know how much we appreciate your support as we work to fly our mission safely. I'm really proud of the NASA team and the Boeing team for all the work they've been doing the last couple of months. It's really been impressive to see how they've been very agile in testing, gathering data, and completing analysis. And then having the tough discussions that go along with processing that data and coming to conclusions. Our intent today was to have the first part of a flight readiness review. The goal of that review was to come up with a NASA recommendation on whether we should proceed with the crewed flight test, either crewed or uncrewed. Our Boeing partners told us that they would be able to execute either option, and they thought that the call belonged to NASA because of our wider view of all the risks involved. We conducted a poll. All of the organizations on the polling sheet indicated that they thought we should proceed uncrewed with the flight test. And so our next step will be to process toward that uncrewed flight test. To finish those preparations, and we'll have another part 2 of the readiness review Wednesday or Thursday next week, we believe, to make sure that we're ready for undock and to complete the test. We are still in the middle of a test flight. We have to remain vigilant. We need to get the vehicle back on deck, go through the data, and once we've done that, we'll start thinking about our next steps for Starliner's next flight. And now I'd like to pass the mic to Steve to share more info and more details.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks for the kind words. I want to thank all of you for being here and the public and everybody for following our progress over the summer. It's been a long summer. It's been a long summer for our team, and I want to first start out by thanking our team who's worked so hard over the summer, long hours, weekends, nights, testing, analysis, reviews. I mean, it has just been an incredible effort by the team. We are dealing with a very complex issue with the thrusters, and I'll talk more about that, but it's challenging to predict their performance. It's challenging to predict the temperatures we'll see. And so that's why it's been tough, and it's taken the time ever since we docked back on June 6th to get to this point. Very proud of the due diligence that the team has displayed, their perseverance, their fortitude, courage, dedication, resilience as they learned more and we got more data and different results at times than we expected. I especially want to thank the Boeing team and their contractor team, Aerojet Rocketdyne, the engine manufacturer, the valve manufacturer, Moog, all their suppliers that participated, along with the NASA workforce. We have brought in expertise from just about every NASA center. We did testing at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Of course, our White Sands test facility did testing on the thrusters. So this has been a huge effort across all of NASA within the Commercial Crew Program and even beyond. Determining the position to bring Starliner back uncrewed was very difficult for me personally. We're all committed to the mission, which we started out, which is to bring Butch and Sunny back. But as we got more and more data over the summer and understood the uncertainty of that data, it became very clear to us that the best course of action was to return Starliner uncrewed. And I'll talk about the other aspects of the mission in a little bit. The bottom line relative to bringing Starliner back is there was just too much uncertainty in the prediction of the thrusters. If we had a model, if we had a way to accurately predict what the thrusters would do for the undock and all the way through the deorbit burn and through the separation sequence, I think we would have taken a different course of action. But when we looked at the data and looked at the potential for thruster failures with a crew on board, and then getting into this very tight sequence of finishing the deorbit burn, which puts the vehicle on an entry, and then immediately maneuvering from that into a SEP sequence to separate the service module and crew module, it was just too much risk with the crew, and so we decided to pursue the uncrewed test flight. The path forward now is to, as Ken said, work toward the Flight Readiness Review Part 2. Well, we review now. We know the scope of the mission. We know it's an uncrewed test flight. We are changing the separation sequence that we planned, and we will review those aspects at the readiness review. We're going to go with a simplified separation technique to get away from station a little more quickly. We'll get to the deorbit burn and execute that nominally. We have a good setup in terms of the opportunities into the White Sands Space Harbor for a number of opportunities in September. We'll land or undock in early September, and then we have a lot of work to do relative to the rest of the mission, which is Butch and Sunny stay on the space station for some time, and they return on Crew 9. We're configuring that spacecraft with a couple extra, 2 different seats. So we'll have 2 different crew members, 2 crew members on that vehicle, and then we'll have it ready to bring Butch and Sunny home. So they'll be ballast in 2 seats on the uphill. We also have to work to reconfigure the Crew 8 vehicle. When Starliner undocks, it will undock first, and then the Crew 8 vehicle will serve as the lifeboat for Butch and Sunny. We have a configuration on the cargo pallet we'll go put in place. So again, we'll get Calypso home ready to do so. We're going to take our time taking the steps, each step along the way. We'll have an important simulation ahead of that flight readiness review with the flight control team. You know, if you put yourself in their place, they have practiced for 2 years to bring a crew home on Starliner. There are some differences in executing the undock sequence and the coast to the deorbit burn and the deorbit burn without a crew, and so they're going to practice that next week. I'm extremely grateful for the Commercial Crew Program, the entire team. It's an honor to represent them here today, and I'll turn it over to Dana Weigel.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all very much for being here, for your interest in this historic test flight mission and also in the International Space Station. As you heard, with the decision to leave Butch and Sunny on board till February, they'll be with us on station for 8 months. I think most of you know our normal expedition durations are 6 months long. but we have had a number of flights with astronauts who've stayed on board with us for 12 months at a time. So this 8-month stay is very much within our normal operational experience base. While Butch and Sunny are on board, they'll be doing science, station maintenance. They'll execute the SpaceX 31 research and cargo mission, and we may have a couple spacewalks for them towards the end of their expedition. Since they've been up there, they've been a welcome set of helping hands. They've already done about 100 hours of work on 42 different experiments, and they've helped us with some of the critical station maintenance that we've had on board. For us, looking forward, the station team is focused on the planning and the rework for the undock, the Starliner undock. As you heard from Steve, that's targeted for early September. Before we hit that undock window, we're going to do the work to reconfigure the Crew 8 Dragon. We'll probably do that within the next week or so to have that in place for a 6-crew contingency return capability. And just to reiterate, as Steve said, this just gives us a contingency capability after Starliner departs and before the Crew 9 vehicle arrives. Crew 9 with 2 crew will launch no earlier than September 24th. We'll do a normal handover between the crews, and then we'll have Crew 8 undock. After that, we will relocate the Crew 9 vehicle, so that Dragon vehicle will be relocated to open up the forward port for the SpaceX 31 cargo mission, and we're planning that mission somewhere in mid-October. In between all of that, we've got a Soyuz crew exchange. That's happening September 11th will be the launch of 73S. That'll be carrying NASA astronaut Don Pettit, and then Tracy Dyson will go home after that Soyuz exchange. So we've got a lot of busy activities in front of us this fall. On behalf of the station program, I do want to thank the entire team, the commercial crew program, the Boeing team, and all of our technical teams. They've done a tremendous amount of work over the summer, getting us to the point where we have enough data and enough information to make this really critical and difficult decision that we've made today. So very much appreciated. And as I think all of you know, commercial crew program is critical to the success of ISS. So we appreciate everything they've done. And with that, I'll hand it over to Norm Knight.
Thank you, Dana. I want to thank all of you for your continued interest in our mission. And I want to echo my gratitude for the teams on the ground, both Boeing and NASA, and our astronauts on board for their tireless work and effort with this test flight over many years, especially during the last few months. You know, with the dedication to, or the decision to fly Starliner home uncrewed, the ground teams will still be fully engaged, ensuring Starliner returns safely. Now, while the teams are hard at work here on the ground, we also have Butch and Sunny living and working 260 miles above our planet. They're giving our teams valuable feedback on Starliner. They've served as an integral part of our on-orbit increment, and they demonstrated patience, adaptability, flexibility, resilience, and readiness. That's what you get with an American astronaut. They've been eager to contribute to important conversations. They've asked questions. They've seamlessly become part of the Expedition 71 crew, contributing to the important work on board the International Space Station. You know, when you're charting new paths for exploration, there are highs and lows. We all know this. It's part of exploration and moving forward. Spaceflight is hard. The margins are thin. The space environment is not forgiving. And we have to be right. We all know this. This was a tough problem to be solved, and a decision had to be made. I want you to remember, Starliner is a robust vehicle with excellent flying qualities, as evidenced by the manual demonstration accomplished by Butch prior to docking. And Starliner has performed exceptionally well overall, so please don't lose sight of that. This is a test flight, and the thruster issue and the associated investigations will pay huge dividends in the future for human exploration in a great way when Starliner flies again. I am encouraged by the dedication and resilience both the NASA and Boeing ground teams and, of course, our space flyers exhibit. I talked with Butch and Sunny both yesterday and today, they support the agency's decision fully, and they're ready to continue this mission on board ISS as members of the Expedition 71 crew. I would also be remiss not to mention that this decision also affects the Crew 9 mission and the astronauts that are assigned to fly in that mission in September. Crew 9 mission will now configure Dragon for 2 crew members and will provide seats for Butch and Sunny to return. We're also working to finalize those crew assignments and update the training plan. Those decisions will be made public once they are finalized. I would again like to thank all the teams who have designed, built, and now fly Starliner. Going forward, their hard work will continue to pave the path for expanded human spaceflight exploration. Thanks.
Thanks, Norm. We'll move into the question and answer portion now. We'll open it up again to folks in the room and folks on the phone. If you're on the phone, press *1 to get into the queue. Please clearly state which of our participants you are addressing in your question, and we appreciate you limiting yourself to 1 question. So with that, yeah, in the back.
Mark Strassman, CBS News. This could be for Jim or Ken or Steve. I'll let you decide. My question is about trust. Spaceflight is a business that's built on trust. You trust that everyone's going to do their job. You have to have trust in all your space partners. Boeing essentially said, trust us. We have a spacecraft that is ready to return astronauts home. And NASA went in a different direction. So how now do you begin to rebuild that relationship of trust with Boeing?
You guys want me to pause and answer, or you just want to let this play out? It's up to you. Answer it. Pause and answer. All right, we'll do pause and answer again. That's fine. So what I like to do here is I like to try to answer the questions before they do. Let it ride. Okay, so trust. They're already working with each other, guys. They're already working with each other. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this isn't an extremely difficult problem to solve. It's a hard problem to solve. You don't work on a car's engine when you're driving down the highway going 80 miles an hour. This is a really difficult one. And I think they're going to probably say, oh, we have full confidence, right? But I mean, the glaring issue here is that you're not doing your due diligence. And I don't believe there's any nefarious purpose. I still don't believe there's any nefarious purpose going on there. I think it's inexperience. I think the people that are running Starliner, they want to do a good job, but they don't know how. This thruster is a case in point. Your thermal analysis was off. The thermal analysis was off, which caused the thrusters to overheat because they weren't sure. They weren't sure because, for whatever reason, the technical expertise for these thrusters that have 30 years of previous flight experience on the shuttle was not included into that analysis. That reeks of inexperience. But the trust is still there. It'll always be there. Like, there's not broken trust here. It's just you need to get your stuff together. It's not about trust. It's about making sure you do your due diligence. But they probably won't say that. They'll probably just say, yes, we trust them.
I'll start. I don't think it's a trust issue at all. I don't think we're rebuilding trust. I think we're looking at the data, and we view the data and the uncertainty that's there differently than Boeing does. It's not a matter of trust. It's our technical expertise and our experience that we have to balance. And I think Ken said it. We balance risk across everything, not just the Starliner piece. So I don't see it as a trust issue at all. I guess Ken or Stitch. Yeah.
Well, I would say that we've had a lot of tense discussions, right, because the call was close, and so people have emotional investment in either option, and that gives you a healthy discourse. But after that, you have to do some work to keep your team together, right, to keep your team restored and ready for the next issue. And I'll acknowledge that we have some work to do there. It's pretty natural whenever you've had a difficult decision to make, but we're aware of it, and we'll work it, and we're committed to continuing to work with Boeing. Steve, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it trust. I would call it a technical disagreement where we get a group of engineers together and they disagree on the risk level of what could potentially happen to the thrusters. Boeing did a great job building a model. Now, the question is that model good enough to predict performance for a crew?
No. No, they didn't.
All the work we've done is
No,
really
they didn't.
important also for bringing this vehicle back. We want the vehicle to come back uncrewed. It needs to land at the White Sands Space Harbor, which is where the opportunities are setting up in September. And all the work that we've done, both on the NASA and Boeing side, give us confidence to bring the vehicle back. It has to execute a deorbit burn. It has to do all the things we need it to do, undocking from the space station safely. So I think together we have worked toward that part. There's just a little disagreement in terms of the level of risk. And that's kind of where it got down to. And I would say, it's close. It's very close, and it just depends on, how you evaluate the risk. We did it a little differently with our crew than Boeing did. So.
And Mark, trust is a two-way street, and it's built upon a relationship. And I think, as indicated just an hour ago by the new CEO of Boeing, that they intend to move forward and fly Starliner in the future, which is very important to NASA, that we have two human-rated vehicles. I think you should understand the trust is two ways.
You're paying them billions of dollars. I would hope so.
Ars Technica. Two questions.
Here we go.
One for the administrator, just to follow up on that question about Boeing and your discussion with the Boeing CEO, Kelly Ortberg. How do you anticipate that NASA can help Boeing get Starliner operational missions? Could you maybe fly like a cargo mission to support that, or just curious what your thoughts are on that? And then for, I think, Ken Bowersox, curious, when did you think it was likely that Crew Dragon would be the vehicle to bring the crew home, Butch and Sonny? From the outside, it does seem like that you saw something perhaps in the White Sands test data that gave you concern. It certainly seemed like that's when the odds seem to shift toward Dragon. Would love any insights on that. Thank you.
So the first question is, send it up as cargo. Why would, if you're trying to crew certify a capsule, why would sending it up in a cargo configuration help you get a crew certification? No, what they're most likely going to do is when this mission is over, they're going to look at the thermal models. They're going to look at the data that was encountered from this mission and adjust their analytical model from there. Now, why is adjusting the analytical model so important? Well, the analytical model is basically what governs your control systems on a capsule. All right, your thrusters are going to overheat if you have their duty cycle go at like 100 pulses a second, right? So refigure your trajectory for 80 pulses a second. Maybe they'll fly Starliner in another uncrewed mission, not out of the realm of possibility, but this controls problem, this whole problem stems from, once again, their lack of understanding of temperatures inside of the capsule, which I'll admit is a very difficult thing to predict. So that it's tough, but now you have good data for it. You got some good data, and if they get the capsule back, hey, that's good too, and I hope they will. Right now, so I don't think launching it in a cargo configuration. The vehicle's never configured. There's never configured for that. So I'm not sure if Eric means like putting an anthropomorphic test dummy in there, right, and then just filling it with cargo and using it for a resupply mission. Maybe, perhaps. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but that would be another mission that Boeing would have to pay out of pocket. I'm not saying that they won't either. I'm just saying that the whole point of this mission is to certify this thing for human spaceflight. Launching another cargo mission is not going to do that. This should give you the data that you need to adjust your models here, your thermal models, right? And revise your control system algorithms to take into account this duty cycle. It's something that pretty much could just be patched to Starliner if they knew what they needed to patch. They could send up an update to it right now, but you don't know. They need to get that data. So I don't think the next one's going to be cargo. Now, the second question, I know why Eric asked that. He asked him when they thought about, at what point did you think using Dragon would be a good idea? He's using that to coincide with what his source is telling, what his source told him, because he was the first one to break the story, most likely, if I had to guess. Ken Bowersock's probably going to give him a non-answer for that one, but we'll see.
Your question to me is best answered by the people that are going to determine the specific testing and what is required before the crew would fly.
Yeah, I can take a cut at that, Eric. So we're going to sit down with Boeing and kind of lay out what's that path, right? I would say the White Sands testing did give us a surprise. We saw in that testing, as we did 5 total simulations with that thruster of a downhill deorbit burn sequence. And so that's when we saw this swelling of the poppet on the oxidizer side. In other words, a piece of Teflon that swells up and it gets in the flow path and causes the oxidizer to not go into the thruster the way it needs to go into. And that's what caused the degradation in thrust. when we saw that, I think that's when things changed a bit for us in that now we know that's prevalent, and where is it prevalent in other thrusters, and then what could that swelling do in the future. So that's, I think, where we change course. What we have to do now moving forward for Starliner 1 is how do we avoid firing that thruster in a manner that would cause the heating, that causes that oxidizer poppet Teflon piece to swell? Can we figure out how to do that with some testing? And can we also have learned recently that the environment in the doghouse, and I think I've talked about this, is hotter than we thought. In other words, when the other thrusters fire in a doghouse, some of that heat soaks back into an individual thruster, and that causes the Teflon to swell. It also causes some vaporization of the propellant. So is there a way we can figure out how to get the doghouse cooler overall? And then thirdly, we see crosstalk sometimes when an OMAC, the orbital maneuvering engine, the big 1,500-pound thruster fires, it then causes heat on one of the adjacent thrusters. So we've got to sit down and go through all those details with Boeing, with Aerojet. The teams have been so focused over the last couple months at understanding the physics and what's going on, which we have a much better understanding of that now. Now that we have that understanding of the physics, I think we can move forward and start to find mitigations for future flights. See if Ken has anything to add.
Well, for me, the White Sands results I thought were a gift. It was just great to have that data. And I really thought it might help us convert. I've seen it with a few of our discussions where we have people in different camps on a risk decision. We gather more data, and then a piece of data comes in, and we come together, and everybody agrees that we take one path or the other. And I thought we might get there until probably about a week ago. I'd say that's where it started looking like, hey, I just don't think we'll get there in time for bringing Starliner home in a timely manner. With more time, we might have gotten a lot smarter, but we're just at the point where we need to bring Starliner home, take all the data we can, and keep moving forward, I think.
Next question is from Marcia Dunn on the phone lines. Marcia Dunn from Associated Press.
Yes, hi. For you, Ken, I'd like a little more information on how the opinions were split. Was it 50-50, 75 to 25% in favor of SpaceX? If you could just characterize the numbers for and against, and also if you could discuss the mood in the room today. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I can really give you a good answer to this question because I wasn't in the room. So this isn't really a technical question, so I'm just going to let them answer. Yeah.
The polling was unanimous amongst all the NASA folks. Boeing expressed the ability to either work crewed or uncrewed. They believe in their vehicle, and they'd be willing to bring a crew home on it. We had some NASA folks that took a broader view of the global risks, who thought that, hey, we probably should keep the crew on the test flight. To say whether that was 15, 20% of the people, I'd have a hard time coming up with that number. But as far as the mood, all of us really wanted to complete the test flight with crew, and I think unanimously we're disappointed not to be able to do that. But that's part of the reason our system is set up the way it is, right? You don't want that disappointment to weigh unhealthily in your decision. And so on purpose, our system increases the volume on some of our voices from the technical authorities, folks that are asked not to think about those emotions, and it helps to pull you away from the fact that you might be disappointed in a certain decision, and then guides you towards that final outcome.
And I would add on the mood in the room, you know, I think everybody is professional and did their jobs, but there is a sense of not accomplishing the mission that we set out to do. And even for myself personally, that is a hard thing to go through. It's a little bit of a situation of loss and feeling like you lost something. And we haven't, in the ultimate long-term view, we have not lost anything because Boeing, as the Administrator Nelson said, is committed to finding the solutions and flying Starliner again. But I probably can't express in words what it's like when you commit to a mission, you've worked on a mission so long, and then we make a fairly dramatic change, which we have not done in human spaceflight in a long time. And so there's a feeling of loss, and we'll work with our team to make sure we talk about that and we move forward from here, because we need this team to focus not only on returning Starliner safely, but we have a Crew 8 mission to return and reconfigure. We have a Crew 9 launch coming up as well, and we need to focus on all those things. We have a really busy time frame, and we'll do that. We'll talk to the team and make sure they understand that it's nobody's fault, and it's a normal feeling to have this feeling of loss or that you didn't complete what you intended to do.
Okay, we'll take the next question also from the phone lines from Marissa Parra from NBC News.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for doing this. Bruce Parr with NBC here. Senator Nelson, this could be for you or for anyone else who wants to join in. We heard a mention of a next space flight for Starliner a couple of times, and we know how much NASA would like to have an alternative to SpaceX, more companies available to provide the ability to shuttle astronauts to the ISS. Senator Nelson, how certain are you that Boeing will ever launch Starliner with a crew on board again?
Yeah, that's a non-answer. NASA's, I mean, it's not a non-answer. That's a weird question. The reason why it's a weird question is because NASA has 6 Starliner missions contracted to Boeing. They will follow through somehow. But once again, it's a test flight, guys. Now, do you want to go and do a test flight where you get caught with your pants down with this big of a glaring misunderstanding of the mission? With your thermals? No. But once again, it's a test flight. I'm glad they got it. I'm glad they caught it now. Starliner will follow through. NASA's committed to it. You need to have that dissimilar architecture for this exact reason. You know, you never know. I know it might seem like a far-fetched thing, and it probably is at this point, but you know, something might happen with Dragon, and Starliner might need to do something to fix it as well. It's possible. I know it seems like copium right now. I get it. You don't need to tell me. But once again, if it was just Starliner flying right now, we'd be screwed. And if they've caught this problem on the Starliner 1 mission or the Starliner 2 mission, well, now you got to get 4 people back down instead of 2. That proposes a extremely complicated logistical problem now, because now you'd have to launch a Dragon uncrewed to the space station. Could it do it? Sure, why not? But that, once again, that's a little more of a challenging logistical problem. I'm happy it happened now, but yeah, NASA's committed to doing this. Starliner will fly with people eventually, but the behavior needs to be understood. And I think that's why so many people are so freaking pro SpaceX, because SpaceX leaves no stone unturned. They're paranoid. They're paranoid, and they're always hungry, and they're always trying to push to make the thing better. And I'm not saying that Boeing doesn't either. Eventually, they'll pick up steam, and they'll get to that point. But the inexperience shows. Just saying.
100%.
See?
100%.
Correct.
There is no shadow of a doubt in your mind. Can you explain why?
Because of what this panel has already told you. The extensive cooperative working relationship between NASA and Boeing, finding the problem, but knowing that the uncertainties are what held up the crew getting on Starliner to go home, and a certainty on my part that we will find out the uncertainty, and Boeing's willingness to carry through on this program.
All right, next question from the phones, Kristen Fisher from CNN.
Thank you. My question is also for Senator Nelson. Senator, you were a member of the congressional committee that investigated the Challenger accident. You were a senator when Columbia happened. How much did that experience influence your personal decision today? Thank you.
You had 2 scenarios where you ignored Challenger and Columbia were the result of ignoring these people, what the panel said, what the engineers said, right? It influenced his decision because he doesn't want to kill more astronauts. I'm pretty sure that's pretty straightforward, but all right.
Well, very much. It has affected the decision today by this collective group and all of those that participated in the flight test readiness review this morning. It is a trying to turn around the culture that first led to the loss of Challenger and then led to the loss of Columbia, where obvious mistakes were not being brought forth. For example, give you specifics going back to the loss of Challenger. Even the engineers in Utah, in Morton Thiokol, were begging their management not to launch because of the cold weather. And that information never got up. And that was happening on the very night before the launch the next morning. Another example, on Columbia, astronauts would get through with their flights and they'd inspect the orbiter, and as a matter of fact, my commander, Hoot Gibson, said he'd look at subsequent flights and he would look like that a shotgun had been shot on the delicate silicon tiles because of so much of the foam shedding off of
STS-26,
the external tank.
Yeah.
There was a culture that did not bring that information up to the decision makers.
No.
So NASA ever since has tried very hard to bring about an atmosphere in which people are encouraged to step forward and speak their mind. And I think right today is a good example of that.
So he said his commander, Hoot Gibson, not a lot of people know, Bill flew on the space shuttle flight that flew right before Challenger, about 2 weeks before Challenger exploded. The commander of that mission was Hoot Gibson, actually a really, really, really good, great shuttle astronaut. He flew a lot of shuttle missions. The mission he was talking about with debris strikes on the thermal protection system of the space shuttle didn't come necessarily from foam coming off of the external tank. Hoot Gibson also commanded the STS-26 mission. One of the first missions, actually, I think STS-26 was the reflight after Challenger, or it was either 26 or 27. Either way, what happened is one of the booster separation mechanisms, the SRB separation mechanisms, went off too quick, and it basically shot a rocket engine at the shuttle's thermal protection system while it was still attached. Rockets are very abrasive. The only reason that shuttle mission came back is because that rocket engine shot directly at a mounting plate to mount an interior component inside of the space shuttle that just happened to be reinforced with steel. Because the aluminum skin of the orbiter ablated, and the steel plate that was behind that particular spot was the only reason why the orbiter came back in one piece. The steel was able to handle the heat over that part of the thermal protection system. What happened with Starship on IFT-4 almost happened on 27, excuse me. Thank you. So, yeah, that's what he's talking about. But he said it was from the external tank. No, it wasn't. It was from the SRB. The SRB motor went off a little bit too early. Now, the thing that got Columbia was foam. Foam from the external tank delaminated during ascent. It came off during ascent because that foam had cavitation on the back side of it. The reason why is because the STS-107 mission scrubbed like 5 or 6 times. And the external tank, which is really only designed to be used once, maybe twice, was tanked and detanked 8 times. And when you tank and detank, believe it or not, the external tank, when it's filled up with fuel, actually contracts. It doesn't expand. It contracts. And that expansion of being detanked and contraction of being retanked a bunch of times caused cracks in the foam. We saw, actually, believe it or not, we saw very similar behavior with the Artemis 1 core. Now, of course, on Artemis 1, it doesn't matter. Who cares? Because there's no orbiter attached to the side, right? So it's not that big of a deal. But they did reapply the spray-on foam insulation in high areas of areas that are highly susceptible to structural changes during tanking and detanking. They did apply it. If you go look at a picture of the Artemis 1 stack, while it's sitting on the pad, there's different color orange stripes that go horizontally around it where they reapplied the foam. Now, yeah, that's what happened to Columbia. They tanked and detanked the external tank a bunch of times, and the foam cracked, and then it came off under the crazy aerodynamic stress that gets put on the external tank when the space shuttle flies. Some of that foam came off and punched a hole in the tiles punched a hole in the reinforced carbon on the left side leading edge of the wing. The leading edge on the wings were made out of a different thermal protection system. They weren't tiles. They were reinforced carbon. The reason why they used RCC there is because RCC, its material properties are good enough to straight up resist having plasma flow over it. The reason why is because the shuttle's nose cone leaves a wake during hypersonic reentry. And at different points during hypersonic reentry with the space shuttle, that plasma wake that happens from the nose crosses over the wing. And when I say plasma wake, anything that gets in the way of that plasma wake is basically subject to the same conditions that are applied when you take a plasma cutter to something. So if it's not able to resist the heat, and that plasma wake flows over that spot with a hole in it, it's a very high stress, high thermal stress, high structural stress area. That part on the RCC on Columbia where it popped was right next to the landing gear on the left side wing, a very, very critical structural area. The landing gear is the wing box on the shuttle that holds the whole thing together. So when that plasma went through, it basically sliced the wing right off. And we all know what happened after that. So, yeah, a little bit of clarification there. But, yeah, basically how I answer the question is still exactly the same.
Do we have other questions in the room? Yep, back left.
Good morning. Cheryl Mercedes here with KHOU here in Houston, Texas. Any of you can answer this question?
No fodder.
Just
Good
really
question,
simply
though.
state it to the folks at home who have no idea what these two astronauts are experiencing right now up in orbit. All they're hearing is the technical stuff and what we're reporting. What do you have to say to those folks who are saying, man, these guys simply are going to miss out on the holidays with their families at home? What's it like for them up there? What are they experiencing day to day now with this decision and this news that it will now be months before they return? Thank you.
So they're going to say they're test pilots. They're test pilots, dudes. They signed up for this. You might have a snafu. This happens with spaceflight. Sometimes you can't be 100% sure. You got to roll the dice. Like, don't get me wrong. It is a massive, colossal screw up that Boeing didn't get their thermal models right for thrusters, right? And that's a colossal screw up. But the flip side of that, guys, is once again, as much as we want to sit here and dump on Boeing, look, man, there's no real good way to test that down here. You can't test how a thruster is going to work in the sun in a vacuum over multiple long firings. You could try to, even if you did the same thing down here, you're still not going to see the exact same results. The reason why is because we're not in a vacuum. There's no vacuum chamber that can test outgassing like that. It just doesn't, there's nothing. Should we have something like that? Well, yeah, I mean, that probably would be a good idea. Just putting it out there. But yeah, they're test pilots. They signed up for this. How do they feel? They feel fine. If anything, that's a treat that they get to stay up on the ISS for a long period of time. That's what they're going to say.
Thank you.
I'll jump in on this one. First off, all the astronauts on station are professionals. All those qualities I talked about with Butch and Sonny, that's exemplified in every astronaut that flies to the International Space Station. They're professionals. When they launch, they know that there are circumstances where they can be on board for up to a year. So mentally, you know that you could be in that situation. Now, once you're in the arena, obviously, it's a little different. It's challenging. It's disappointing that they're not coming home on Starliner, but that's okay. It's a test flight. That's what we do. They knew those risks going in, but we keep them very busy. There's a lot of science and research going on the International Space Station that Dana can elaborate on and has elaborated on. We keep them busy, we keep them working, and they are continuing to pave the road for human exploration going forward. So it's great. They're part of the crew, and they're doing fine.
What do you say to their families?
I care deeply about their families. I know this is a huge impact to their families, and it means a lot. Their families are the pillars that keep them strong. They're the pillars that we at NASA depend on for the workforce to keep us going. They're the pillars that help this team with the crewed flight test have the resilience to keep going, especially over these last 2 months that were needed to go forward. And that's both at NASA and Boeing. So family is the backbone of what we do in the support structure. So
family.
I tell their families, thank you. Thank you for their support. Thank you for what they do to allow NASA and our commercial partners to do what we do to explore space.
I like that guy.
We're going to go back to the phone lines. Next is Eben Brown from Fox News.
Hi, good afternoon. Eben Brown, Fox News for Administrator Nelson. Sir, I can appreciate all the technical and R&D review here that's being detailed for us and the investment everyone has in this. But I'd like to ask you about the investment we as taxpayers have given to Boeing over, I think it's at least 15 years now. It's been hundreds of millions from seed money to selecting them as providers for commercial crew. At what point, and I understand this is an oversight issue and it may come from something above the agency, but your career has spanned both the agency and above the agency, and I want to know how or when or what's the process for reviewing this contract to determine we're not we're not getting what we paid for as taxpayers. I say this as knowing that there is a public sentiment that is very skeptical of Boeing as a corporation right now, not just due to this, but also due to their other issues in commercial aviation. So I'd like to know when those discussions happen and how they happen and what gets discussed.
They're not going to review the contract, guys. This stuff's already paid for. It's up to NASA now to hold Boeing's feet to the fire and get this stuff done. But you see, this is my problem. There are journalists that like to make a thing out of this, like NASA and Boeing are at each other's throats. They're not at each other's throats. The reality of this stuff is that it takes time. Once again, I ain't defending Boeing by any means. Screwing up a thermal model this far into your mission is the program is not good. Once again, it reeks of inexperience. But what does NASA do? Cut ties? Then you have one spacecraft, and then you've wasted billions of dollars. Learning from this experience and getting that capsule up and running is quintessential to NASA's long-term plans, not just with the ISS, but building a commercial low Earth orbit economy. You have to have some competition. The whole point of the Commercial Crew program was to open up commercial markets in space. How are you going to do that where before the program even finishes, you already have a monopoly with Dragon, right? And don't get me wrong, Dragon's amazing. It's an awesome spacecraft. I'd rather have that than nothing, but they've already invested the money. They've already invested the time. This isn't some sunk cost fallacy thing. Spaceflight is difficult. And once again, I think in light of what we've heard today, it's kind of impossible to say that Boeing didn't colossally screw up here. Like, I was waiting on the fault tree analysis to see if this was unexplained behavior, but it's not. We found multiple PDFs off NASA's own technical report server detailing this exact problem with the space shuttle during the space shuttle era. Multiple ones from different decades over the shuttle's 30-year tenure that talk about NTO poppet seals degrading under high thermal conditions. This problem was known. It was known. And Starliner uses a very similar style thruster to the space shuttle. Boeing did that because they thought they could save money on it rather than redesigning it. Well, that doesn't seem like a wise decision in the long run here, because it turns out when you fire the people that work on these thrusters day to day, the technicians, and then you hire new people and use the same exact thruster, you run into the same problems. All the fixes for poppet seal degradation for the space shuttle's thrusters were done in the field. They were done by people at Kennedy Space Center that actually put hands on the vehicle. It says it right in the PDF. Just saying. So this is what I would do if I was in Bill's shoes right now. The right thing is to see it through, but you have to make sure that Boeing is on their game. But once again, you can't take into account that this reeks of inexperience. The right thing for Bill to do, and this is what I would do, would be to make sure you go in there, get the technical expertise that you need to make sure this program goes through. Because, yeah, not great right now. Not great. You got to fix it. Got to fix this. You know, and for the people that say, oh, cancel it. Every single time in NASA's history where someone says we are wasting money on this, we have a cheaper way of doing it, NASA has ended up with less money. Think about it for a second. Why do we use the Saturn V? We could use the space shuttle. The space shuttle's reusable. We'll save money on it. Oh, now we can't go to the moon. Why are we spending so much money developing a space station? Why do we need to do that? Why don't we work with the Russians to make an international space station? Less money. Half of Space Station Freedom's modules got made. They used that as an excuse to cut a bunch of modules out of the Space Station Freedom program, including escape vehicles. Interesting. Every single time. Why should we keep flying the space shuttle? The space shuttle's expensive. Constellation is expensive. We should leave it to the commercial market. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but you can't sit here and say that NASA didn't end up with less money after that decision. Now, don't get me wrong. SpaceX, great idea. It was a great idea putting all your eggs in Elon's basket like that, right? That was a good call. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it doesn't. But remember, The context of this conversation is that every time someone says there's a cheaper way to do it, NASA ends up with less money. People seem to have this kind of stipulation that if we have a cheaper way to do it, we can spend money on other things at NASA. That's not really how it works. Something to keep in mind. So what's the correct action? See it through. Is canceling it right now? You know, you think about sunk cost fallacy. Canceling it right now, you spent billions of dollars and you have nothing to show for it. You see this thing through, you spend a little bit more money right now to get this through. Actually, I mean, I would make Boeing pay for another test flight if they're going to do it. I mean, and as they should, right? But you are much closer to finishing this than you are to beginning it, right? Starliner's close. You got to train those people at Boeing. You got to get those inexperienced people up to snuff. And once they will, they'll succeed. You know why? Because nobody in the aerospace industry gets into this industry for the cash, at least on the technical and engineering and side of these things. You don't go put spacecraft together because it's a good paying job. You put spacecraft together because you friggin' love it. Understand what I'm saying? They'll succeed. You got to give them the tools that they need to.
To specifically answer your question, you remember when we started the commercial program, one of the advantages of the commercial program was that it was going to be a fixed price contract. So much of NASA's research and development in a very unforgiving environment, space, that is very hard and is cutting edge technology, and it is very expensive. And as a result, on the normal way of contracting, cost plus, it will run the cost way up. Not so with the commercial crew program. And that was part of the negotiation for both of the companies, Boeing and SpaceX. And they've got a fixed price. And if you check the record, you can find out how much additional Boeing has had to spend. So my answer, you're posturing the question of what I would answer in front of a congressional committee about the cost, is that this program is working like it should. Now, if your question portends something else, then speak it. But I think that's what you were getting at.
Wrecked.
Okay. We'll go to Joey Roulette from Reuters.
All right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're trying to hit at something else. Speak it. Oh, you're not. Oh, I guess that means you need to shut the frick up.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Okay.
I left my pudding eating spoon on the ISS.
How do you like that pudding? I like that. That's a good answer. That's taking accountability. That's what you need.
Thanks. For Bill Nelson, did Kelly Ortberg say when you talked to him whether Boeing would pay for an additional test mission before Starliner gets certified? And for Steve or Ken, I'm reading some contract language from Boeing's most recent modification that says it kind of broadly defines certification as coming after Starliner flies astronauts to and from the ISS. And so I know there's a lot of data that you guys are going to get on the return leg, but since it's coming back empty and based on what we've seen so far, will NASA want to see Boeing fly an additional test mission before it gets its certification, or might NASA change those requirements and certify Starliner anyway?
No. That decision is not one because you feel like it. No. You would not make a decision like that. Steve will probably say this. Watch. That is entirely dependent on the data that gets reviewed from this flight. If the data warrants another mission to make sure that your control systems are upgraded and your thermal conditions are, your control system for your thruster duty cycles are modified to work with the thermal conditions that were encountered during a mission, they'll probably fly crew on the next flight, but that is very contingent on how the data, on the data being reviewed from this one. That's the big one. Steve will talk about that. This is an entirely data-driven decision. You don't sit here and be like, I feel like they got the problems figured out. No. Especially when you're not on a mission. Because when you're not on a mission, you have the time to do this. This is time sensitive because another spacecraft needs to come up to keep the ISS schedule on schedule, right? ISS logistics on schedule. So Unfortunately, they used as much of that leeway time built into the schedule as they could. But when this thing's back down on the ground, that's when they'll really do the real data analysis to figure out exactly what happened, especially once they got some EDL under the hood. They got some data from under the hood of the capsule. Getting hands on hardware that has come back is always going to be more enriching than getting a telemetry downlink from a spacecraft. Now, don't get me wrong. The parts that are on there don't come back. The parts that they're having problems with. See this little thing right there, that nacelle? That's called the doghouse. That's the problem. That's where they're having problems. That part doesn't come back. But in order to get the parts that do come back down, you need that. So getting that data and understanding that data should be used to drive the decision whether you should fly crew on the next flight or whether Boeing needs to pay for another mission.
Joey, it did not come up, nor would it have been appropriate in a conversation of which I'm alerting him as to what the decision of the flight test readiness review was, that we would get into those matters.
Yeah, we've started looking at the flight test objectives, what we have already accomplished on this flight, and what's remaining. We have not, made a total determination yet of what objectives are in front of us or what we've fulfilled. We'll take a little time to do that. I don't think we have decided on the path yet of another crewed flight test. We have gotten a lot out of this vehicle so far. It's been on orbit now for 2.5 months, which we didn't intend, so we've got a lot of data out of that. We'll have to sit down and talk about the certification aspects after the flight. It's a little premature to do that at this point.
So. Yeah, we need to get the vehicle back on the ground and then analyze the data and be driven by that in our next decision. But I wouldn't rule anything out, right? I mean, we have options for how we move forward. The one thing I do want to emphasize is we plan to work together with Boeing to find that path.
See? You wouldn't make that decision right now. You can't. The mission's still going. I pay attention, Reboot, you know what I mean? Been watching these all the time. You understand kind of where their head's at.
Next, we have Chris Davenport from the Washington Post.
Hi, thanks so much. I guess for Ken Bowersox, I want to follow up on that poll, which you said was unanimous. I wonder if you can give us a number of votes cast that was as part of that poll. Was it like 10-0, 12? How many votes were there? Thank you.
He's talking about the unanimous decision from NASA to execute the contingency procedure to bring Butch and Sonny back down on the Crew 9 Dragon and have them stay till February 2025. I don't know the answer to this question, to be 100% honest, because I wasn't in the room when they did the readiness review here. I don't know how many people are in those. Generally, it's like 30 or 40 people from what I've seen. I've never sat in on one of those conversations. I can't really speak to it, but that's the context of the question. So I'll abstain from answering this one.
Well, so I'll kind of go through just mentally all the orgs we polled. We unofficially asked the opinion of the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, the Flight Operations Directorate, the Division Director for ISS and Commercial LEO Development at NASA headquarters, the ISS program, the Commercial Crew Program, the Engineering Technical Authority, the Crew Health and Medical Technical Authority, Safety and Mission Assurance Technical Authority. Let's see, who else did I leave out? All the Senator.
Generally a really big review. There's a lot of people involved with flight readiness reviews. The idea behind these readiness reviews are to leave no stones unturned before you execute. Usually it's before you execute a mission, but in this particular case, they did it for the entry, descent, and landing for Starliner.
Directors from Stennis, Marshall, JSC, and Kennedy Space Center, where the Commercial Crew Program is officially based. Anybody I missed on that list?
It feels like we're against the journalist questions rather than the evil, incompetent company that didn't even care enough to be there. Cryo, I'm not... See, here's the thing. I'm in here for the analysis. I want to make sure that what I tell people in a public forum is the right information. What do I mean by the right information? The reality of spaceflight is that it's data-driven. It isn't about how you feel. It's a data-driven business. The idea is that if there's kids watching out there, they get the idea for how this whole thing kind of works. It's not about how you feel about it. It's about what's going on. What's going on with the spacecraft, understanding the vehicle and going from there. That's something that Gene Kranz talks about a lot in his book, Failure is Not an Option. It's one of my favorite books. Gene Kranz was a flight director for NASA, the first flight director for NASA. He oversaw the ballsy-ass missions to get people to the moon. Him and his right-hand man, the second flight director, Chris Kraft. you learn a lot about the mentality here. Now, once again, this entire time, and I try to give Boeing the benefit of the doubt, but at this point, it's really difficult. What happened with them is kind of a glaring thing. That's a really big problem, messing up thermal analysis. I've said it once, I'll say it again. I'm not sticking up for Boeing. I'm here for sticking up for the analysis. And the analysis kind of shows that Boeing is inexperienced when it comes to spacecraft. That's what it's telling me. That's my gist of this. I don't think necessarily it's incompetence, at least at the engineering level and the technician level. I think Boeing's decision to use a capsule that used shuttle-derived components and then firing all the people that worked on said components and hiring new people later down the road is coming back to bite them. Is that a management problem? Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But what are they supposed to do? Once again, it's an honest question. What are you supposed to do? I mean, the obvious answer at this point is you should have kept those people that worked on the shuttle thrusters on the capsule that uses shuttle thrusters, right? Like that's the obvious solution. But it's really easy to say that in hindsight. It's really easy to say that in lieu of this entire problem, right? Where were the people that were saying this before this happened? No one. Not even Eric Berger. No one could have predicted this. Like I said, I'm not giving... I give the engineers and the technicians the benefit of the doubt here, but the glaring issue, I think, is what that's kind of on everybody's minds is, look, man, why would you tie one hand behind your back by using the hardware but not retaining the technical expertise on this stuff? Who thought that was a good idea? Well, management. So, kind of par for the course with Boeing nowadays. Unfortunately, it's really sad to see that, but yeah, I'm not trying to run cover for them. They need to be held accountable. Oh, absolutely. And I don't think it's right necessarily to hold the current management, responsible for past managerial decisions, because this decision basically set up Starliner to fail before the Starliner program even got off the ground, figuratively, not actually, right? This is the kind of the sins of your fathers thing. The only thing to do now is to really make sure that this thing gets done right. And I can only hope that, well, not only hope, NASA will hold their feet to the fire because they fricked up, and they fricked up bad. And once again, it's a pretty bad reflection of their company. I'm pretty sure they're paying the price for that and with the stock at this point. But yeah, don't get confused. A lot of people think that I'm some Boeing fanboy. I'm not about I'm not about being a Boeing fanboy. I'm after the engineering. I want to understand why the sequence of events that got us to this point and understand the context of those events. And in that regard, I'm not going to sit here and say kind of ignore the managerial aspect, but you're not going to say it's you're not going to, once again, just like spaceflight. We can all sit here and say it's a managerial problem. That certainly is what it seems like. I'm here to prove it. And I think I proved it pretty well. And I had to be unbiased in that analysis. It's pretty obvious at this point with the information presented. You understand?
You got just about everybody.
Yeah, I think I get everybody. And that was again, everybody concurred with proceeding uncrewed. And they stated where they might have one or two people during our meeting that had a different opinion and tried to give those folks an opportunity to talk to the group.
Phil, you're asking, is it bad that they said that Boeing's risk management differs from NASA's risk management and that some at Boeing were confident to fly the crew home on Starliner? And Phil, what if they bring Calypso back down and it works just fine? It's going to take some time to see if this was the right decision. That capsule comes back unscathed. Well, I'm pretty sure that vindicates Boeing pretty well, right? Am I wrong? I'll be the first one to tell you if that's the case. Personally, I think it'll be fine. I think. But I mean, what I think don't matter. I'm just here to give you the technical analysis, right? You know, I think the frustration some people are picking up on is being against the press is the frustration that reporters not listening and wasting their question on inane things instead of asking about what matters. Well, Aqualex, that's why I pause these questions, to give context and understand why they would ask those questions rather than just sitting here saying that's a stupid question, which is what I did in the past. I figure that to be very counterproductive. This is a way of holding me accountable to give you guys the right information and also holding the press accountable so you can understand the context of their question. That's the best way forward, I think. Still looks bad on Boeing. Oh, the optics are absolutely atrocious, bub. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is really bad. Yeah, really bad from a... From like an optics point of view. Oh, yeah, they screwed up bad. But the reality of the situation is that this thing would be extremely hard to predict if you're not experienced. Which begs the question, who at NASA in the early parts of the commercial crew program thought it would be fine to be hands-off with Boeing and let them do the practices that they did? I think that would be very important to understand context there, because when the commercial crew program was awarded to them in 2014, NASA themselves admitted that they're going to put a magnifying glass under SpaceX's, like up SpaceX's tail to make sure they did everything right because they were the risk. They gave Boeing the benefit of the doubt. Well, it's very clear that that favoritism there is coming back to bite us. Because especially after the colossal mess up that was OFT-1 in 2019, arguably a failed mission. Once again, the context here is important. Messing up like this just doesn't happen because somebody was going to eat dinner, right? And they say, oh yeah, the thermal analysis is fine. I want to go get a pizza. That doesn't happen like that. That's not how this industry plays. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, it happens. Like I said, from an optics standpoint, they're screwed. Like, this is not good. Even if that capsule comes down and everything goes fine, no one's going to give them the benefit of the doubt, which is just a shame. And once again, I can already see it happening. Starliner will come down. They might blow out one or two thrusters. The remaining thrusters will compensate, and it'll come down just fine. Hold me to this. I'm serious. Hold me to it. Remember this when the capsule does EDL. EJ, it blew up. You were wrong. I'm serious. Hold my feet to the fire. I want to be held accountable here to make sure that I'm giving you the information that's right. Okay? In order to understand how NASA works. I guarantee you that capsule comes down just fine. But then again, if I'm wrong, I want people to know. I want people to know that I was wrong. How messed up is that, right? But this isn't about me being right or wrong. It's about understanding what's going on. And that's at the root, that's what NASA's trying to do. But once again, if that capsule comes down and it's just fine, and I'm pretty dang sure it'll be just fine when it comes down, right? People aren't going to care. But that will vindicate the Boeing engineers that said it'll be fine, don't you think? That shows that they have confidence in their engineering, which is something you want from somebody in the spaceflight industry. But we'll see. See what happens. Do you think Boeing may choose to keep Starliner on orbit for extra space testing? No, Raymond, they wouldn't do that because that's not a mission objective. Remember, the objective of this mission is to get that capsule up there with people and get it back down. Well, the get it back down part with people is not happening at this point, so the get it back down part is important. It's important for the Calypso capsule to execute the deorbit burn and entry exactly as it would with crew on board, because you don't want to change the objectives of the mission halfway through the mission. The only time you change your flight rationale and your objectives for your stakeholders for the mission is when something goes catastrophically wrong, like Apollo 13. Yeah, that's a great time to pause.
We'll go to Micah Maidenberg from Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. For Administrator Nelson and Jim Free, there was a discussion on a previous call about Starliner returning uncrewed, if that would count as a loss of mission or mission failure. What is your view on that? And if you don't agree that it would be a loss of mission or mission failure, could you please explain why? Thanks.
Yeah, Mike, I think let me go back to echo something Steve said. We've accomplished a lot on this mission and learned a lot about this vehicle, satisfied a lot of the objectives already. That stressed here by Steve, stressed on previous press conference.
Sorry, I was interested in the answer to this question. I don't think it'll be counted as a mishap, to be 100% honest. And it won't be counted as a mishap because of redundant dissimilar architecture. But that certainly means this isn't an experience that you should be humbled by and learn from.
Conferences. We'll look at this as we do any of our missions to see does it fall into any of the categories that we have that we define as a mishap once we get the vehicle back. That's our time to look at that. So I think that's a question I'd say even posed to us on the other side of getting the vehicle back.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go to Izzy Alvarez from ABC.
Thank you, Riv.
Thank you. Can you please tell us in layman terms why NASA chose SpaceX to bring Sunny and Butch home? How did you come to that decision?
What other capsule are they going to ride down on? Sorry. Okay, so the context of this, right? The context of that question is, why not Soyuz? Why not Soyuz? Why did you choose Dragon? Why not bring them down on a Soyuz? Well, long story short, Soyuz doesn't have enough seats to do a seat swap like this. And NASA specifically has Dragon and Starliner and is very heavily invested in getting both of those flying and operational for situations exactly like this. That's the context. Sorry, I'm trying not to be a jerk.
I can take a cut at that, and we'll see. When we looked at, first of all, we looked at the risk of putting Butch and Sunny on the Starliner vehicle due to the issues with the thrusters that we've talked about. And so when we looked at that risk, we said that risk was due to the uncertainties, due to the inability to predict with certainty the thruster performance for the rest of the mission, including holding the orientation of the vehicle for the deorbit burn and then maneuvering the vehicle for the separation of the crew module and the service module. When we came to that conclusion, we started looking at what other options, Dana and I both did, what options do we have, because these missions are really jointly shared between the ISS program and commercial crew program. And as we started looking at various options, it was obvious to both of us that the easiest and best option was to configure the Crew 9 vehicle with a couple empty seats on the way uphill to put ballast in those seats. SpaceX had that capability. We also knew that we had a spacesuit on orbit already that we could utilize for one of the crew members. They've tried that on, and that spacesuit works. Both crew members tried on a spacesuit, so we have a spacesuit now we're going to launch for one of the other crew members on Crew 9. And then we really wanted to give the crew, a suited return like we always have in U.S. spaceflight. So when we started to weigh all those options, it became very obvious that Crew 9 was the best option. Fly up 2 empty seats, have Butch and Sunny join the increment crew and return on Crew 9. That just became the easiest, the best option, and the most efficient option for all of us. And I'll see if Dana has anything to add.
Yeah.
Rourke, theoretically, let's say crewed or uncrewed, a Starliner thruster malfunctions. There's a lot of them, Rourke. There's 28 thrusters on the entire vehicle. If one malfunctions, the computer shuts it off and compensates. It's called engine out capability, and every spacecraft has that capability, including Dragon. You have multiple thrusters pointing in multiple directions, but multiple thrusters also pointing in the same direction. Now, why do they do that? Why would you do that? Well, one, if something breaks, you still can get home, right? But the biggest one is why you cluster RCS thrusters. Why you cluster thrusters is because reaction control system thrusters, their manner of actuation, the way they fire up in the vacuum, is they're a very simple thruster that's basically fed by pressure. But also at the same time, if you have a pressure-fed thruster and you're using non-cryogenic propellants, it's extremely difficult to be able to maintain to basically get the heat away. When you fire a thruster in the vacuum, there's no way to convect heat. Now, if we look at kind of the three basic methods of thermal transfer, how heat moves around, you have convection, conduction, and radiation. All right, those are the three basic ones, okay? So what do those mean, okay? You have convection first. Air passing over something, the air gets near it, it absorbs the heat, keeps going. The radiator in your car uses convection to keep the engine cold by circulating coolant through cooling vanes, and those cooling vanes pass through the air, and the air cools the aluminum channels in the cooling vanes, and because the aluminum gets cold, it cools down the coolant, goes back into your car, keeps the engine nice and cold, right? Convection. You cannot convect anything in space because there's no air. Okay, so convection is out. Now, what are the other two? Conduction. A heat sink on your computer, or even if you're using water cooling, you still have a hydraulic heatsink, right? A heatsink on your computer, say you have an air-cooled heatsink, that is using conduction. It's touching the processor with thermal paste, and because they're touching each other, the heat from the processor moves through the thermal paste and into an aluminum heatsink, which has air flowing over it, convection, to get the air away from your processor to keep it nice and cool. Simple as that, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. That's conduction. Basically, heat transfer through touching something. You can do that to an extent, right? But if you flux heat into anything else in the spacecraft, you could have some problems, like poppet seals, for instance. High heat with corrosive propellants can degrade PTFE seals. Yeah. PTFE is basically a Teflon seal, right? So conduction can work to an extent, but it's not the best option here. The last one is radiation. Radiation is through light, right? When it comes to fluxing heat, getting rid of heat in space, it comes from light. So the engines glow, and that glowing is actually what radiates the heat away in the form of light. You ever see SpaceX launch Falcon 9? They launched the second stage engine, provided it's not that crappy stubby nozzle, right? The engine glows. That's how it keeps itself cool. RCS uses something very similar, but you can only do it so much. It's a tiny thruster. It doesn't have that big, gigantic nozzle like a Merlin vacuum engine would. So you have to modulate your thrust. That's why you have clusters of thrusters, to modulate thrust so you don't introduce too much heat into your actual thruster mechanism that it can't radiate it out fast enough. It can only move the heat out so much. If you put more heat in than you're putting out, it'll start to melt. Thruster will hit critical mass and it'll start to break. Or your PTFE seals for your injector on the oxidizer side will absorb too much heat and they'll start to break up, which is exactly what happened. Make sense? This is an extremely hard problem to solve, especially since there's no way to test that down here. Short of put your service module in an autoclave and try to fire it, which I guarantee you would end badly. Even an autoclave, that's high pressure. That's not it's not what a vacuum does. It's not the right conditions. There's no way to test that down here, guys.
I would just add that, knowing that this was a test flight, we made the decision a couple years ago to train and keep Butch and Sunny current with all aspects of station, some of the most complex things we do, spacewalks, robotics, some of the research. So we had them trained. They've obviously flown to station before. They've done long duration missions. Both of them have. And so, again, when you line that up with our vehicle options and the fact that the Dragon spacecraft is highly automated, as you all know, we've used it for private astronaut missions. We do have a lot of experience taking people with much less training than what our classic training is for our NASA crew and having them fly on Dragons. And so when you look at that in aggregate, it made a lot of sense to make the decision to adjust Crew 9 and have them do a full expedition and come home on a Dragon.
And one thing I'd like to add, a major goal of the Commercial Crew Program is to develop not just the capability to go back and forth to space station, but a generic capability to go back and forth to low Earth orbit to develop a commercial capability. There's two reasons for that. One is dissimilar redundancy. So you have this option where if there's a problem on one vehicle, you might not have the same problem on another vehicle. So you could use them for a return or perhaps keep them flying while another vehicle is working through
XRT, but they had 2 test flights already. How did they not see this before? Now, that's the right question to ask, and I think that comes from an experience. You don't know. How do you know what's going wrong if you don't know what to look for when stuff goes wrong? That would be a big question of mine. How did you get to a crew flight where you had thrusters potentially overheat on previous flights, and you got to a crew flight and somebody said that was okay? It reeks of inexperience, because that tells me whoever's in charge of the risk management there, either, once again, it could be what everybody says. They could be compromised by optics and, we did the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Or B, you don't know any better. Maybe it's column A, maybe it's column B. Who knows?
Why we have more than one provider we're trying to develop.
You're telling me they don't know the max temps for the thrusters? It's an extremely hard thing to predict, Hellfish, but also at the same time, no, there's a bunch of technical reports on NASA technical report server that detail this exact problem happening on shuttle thrusters. And as far as I know, the thrusters on Starliner are very similar in design. So if you knew this problem could happen, once again, if you knew this problem could happen, how'd you get the thermal model wrong? The only logical expertise there is that either they were willfully ignorant to it or they didn't know. My guess is that they didn't know. Because if you want to pit that type of risk management against each other, optics for the company versus, oh, I don't know, killing astronauts, anybody in their right mind would know that you probably shouldn't pit those two against each other, and the astronauts should take precedent. In that case, that evil corporate greed mentality works for us. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to go in favor of column B. I think they didn't know.
Next question is from Kenneth Chang from the New York Times.
Hi, thank you. This is, I guess, is for Administrator Nelson. You expressed confidence that Boeing will continue, but it's also a fixed price contract, so potentially they could lose. They've already written up $1.6 billion. Are you saying that you're confident that they will continue to write off money, losing money on this? And I guess the second question is, has there been any discussion with Air Space about converting Dream Chaser for crew?
That's a good question to ask. The second part about Dream Chaser, has there been any conversations with another supplies provider to the ISS, Sierra Space, which operates a uncrewed, as of now, space shuttle? It's like a little mini space shuttle that can potentially hold crew, but right now it's just on for cargo. They might, I don't know, maybe, it's possible, but I think that even trying to approach Sierra Space at this point and trying to throw them some type of ISS rotation mission at this point and getting that whole program set up when they're not really tooled for it would take too much time. There wouldn't be an ISS left by the time that program gets operational. So in that regard, yeah, you'd stick to Boeing. Like I said, guys, we're on the 5-yard line here, okay? And if you didn't understand that, we're about to score a goal, okay? And there's no offsides call if you want European football or the rest of the world football references. We got a breakaway here, right? So maybe there's one defenseman between us and the goalie, all right? Not offsides. Just got to kick the ball in. You just got to do that final push. You're closer to finishing this than you are to starting it. That's important to understand.
Thank you.
On Sierra, I will let somebody else answer that.
Put it on the airplane.
With regard to Boeing.
Send them home.
Remember, it's a fixed price contract. We expect delivery on the contract, and therefore, there is no discussion at this point on NASA's part in the question that you pose, which is basically that they've spent X, will they spend Y to get to where Boeing Starliner becomes a regular part of our crew rotation?
No, but
that's
not really.
I don't have the answer to that, nor do I think we would have the answer now.
And I'll add about Sierra Space. Sierra's working very hard on their first maiden voyage of the Dream Chaser. That's a cargo mission. They've got the vehicle down at Kennedy, and they're working through test and final assembly. So it's the plan that they fly cargo missions to station through the rest of station. And in fact, that's the scope of the contract that we have with them to provide cargo capabilities. There is no existing contract with the agency for crewed capability, which doesn't mean that that's not a possibility somewhere in the future. In fact, Sierra has their own goals about moving in that direction in the future. But for now, the work and the focus is on getting them flying as a cargo flight. And if you look back to how we started SpaceX and the Dragons, that's a very similar approach. We started with cargo flights first. We flew a number of flights, and then they eventually evolved into the crewed version of the Dragon.
Next question is from Lauren Grush from Bloomberg.
Yep. See, par for the course.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm wondering, can you walk us through what modifications, if any, will be made to Starliner ahead of its return now that it doesn't have a crew on board? And will NASA be flying that return any differently or watching for anything specifically now that it's performing this return without a crew? Thanks.
I'll take the question relative to the reconfiguration of Starliner. There's a few things that we have to do differently. As I said earlier, we're going to modify the separation sequence a little bit to get away from the space station a little quicker than we had planned. So that's one modification. That will be done via ground commanding, and then there will be some time-tagged events in the flight software that they'll execute. There are a few items in the cockpit that have to be configured a little differently. Obviously, if you had a crew on board, some of the life support systems will be configured just like we did on the Orbit Flight Test 2 mission in 2022. We'll use those same configurations. Obviously, we've got to do a little bit of planning relative to the center of gravity without the crew members being in the seats. So we've looked at that already, and that doesn't appear to be a big problem. So we've got a few things like that to go work on. The teams have been really laying out all that data. The ground teams will have a little bit different set of flight rules to operate from. So they'll have that ahead of them. But there's a few minor things to the spacecraft to reconfigure, and we're already in the process of starting that work.
Next question is from Will Robinson-Smith from Spaceflight Now.
I didn't know the answer to the last question. That's why I stopped and listened.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Question, I believe, for Dana Weigel, perhaps Steve Stitch. In one of the previous briefings, it was discussed that I think the Russians wanted to see it was one or two successful whole crew rotation missions of Starliner before they would put one of their cosmonauts on the spacecraft. Has the agency had the opportunity to talk to those cosmonauts about the path forward and what the options will be for flying cosmonauts to and from the space station with Starliner at this point? Thank you.
Sure. Our focus with all the international
I'm not sure what the question is there, but I'm gonna guess she's gonna say something about mixing crews is vital to keeping the ISS working. Americans have launched on Soyuz well before the space shuttle stopped flying, guys. Americans have been flying on Soyuz to the ISS since 2000 on Expedition 1. Bill Shepard, believe it or not, with Sergei Krikalev. It's a great mission. A little while ago, but it was a good mission. Yeah, you got to keep crews mixed because you don't want to have a bunch of Russians up there and have something go wrong on the U.S. side of the station and not have a native English speaker. Vice versa for the Russians. That's why they mix crews. It's a good idea.
partners, as you can imagine. Discussions about what's happening on board or changing launches or operations on board involve not just our NASA team, but the entire international partnership. And so similar to the discussions you've heard today, the focus has been on the decision immediately in front of us with what to do with Starliner crewed or uncrewed. And in fact, when we ended the review today, I sent an email out to all of the program managers across the international partnership so they understood the decision. So they've been following along with us. In terms of Roscosmos thinking about our integrated crew exchanges and flying on the Boeing vehicle, they have always maintained that they want to see a few successful flights before they fly crew on it. I don't expect that that'll change, but we're not actively having those discussions right now. Right now, we're focused on what to do with Starliner, but of course, those are things we'll talk about in the future.
Okay. A little bit of a different context than from what I understood there, but yeah, good to know.
Next question from Irene Klotz at Aviation Week.
Thanks very much. I think this is for Steve. As far as the thruster issues, considering the return of the spacecraft and the performance during OFT 1 and 2, is the primary concern now that because there was the overheating during the approach to station that there is some uncertainty on how these thrusters are now going to perform during the deorbit? And can you also just give us an update on what the status is on Boeing's preparations to return Starliner without crew, and what, if any, additional risks to the spacecraft are? And granted, those are far below risks to crew, but if there are any additional risks at this point in bringing Starliner back uncrewed, since that's not the nominal plan. Thanks.
The whole point of them bringing it down with no people on it is the concern or the uncertainty for the thrusters. That's the whole point. I'm not unsure. I understand the context of this question. She asked, is the uncertainty of the thrusters why they're coming home on Dragon? Yes. Yeah, that was the whole point of this press conference and the whole point of every press conference for the last 2 months. Now, in terms of preparations, what preparations is Boeing making? I mean, Steve Stitch just answered that question. They're adjusting the separation mechanism from the ISS. They have to retool the seats to have the right ballast. Not retool the seats to have the right ballast. That's Crew 9. They have to retool Starliner's thruster axis alignment because they have a shifted center of mass because there's no people inside. So that's going to involve pushing some software updates to Starliner. And also a slightly differential separation mechanism for Starliner. Now, hey, Adam, 71-month resale.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Now, here's the thing, you guys think everybody's like, oh, EJ doesn't like Eric Berger. Well, I'm pretty sure that's what Eric Berger was hearing when he wrote that article, that Ars article a little while back about Starliner's potential in an uncrewed configuration for contacting the space station. It's very clear that NASA's going to adjust the separation mechanism. It's probably because NASA was worried about something like that. So I'm guessing that's what his source meant when he wrote that article. But see, here's the thing. The decision and those contingencies weren't figured out at that particular point. So they weren't sure if it would hit the ISS or not. But that was what was reported, right? But it's very clear that they are worried about something, or else they wouldn't adjust the separation system. So more context there. I mean, yeah, right, Joe? That is weird. Explorer, meanwhile, NSF never gets called to ask a good question. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what they have, why they have it out for us, seemingly. I'm not really sure what's going on, but...
Yeah, good questions, Irene. What I would say is that the thrusters on this flight relative to Orbit Flight Test 2 have experienced higher heating. We had more thrusters fail off, more thrusters see degradation. In fact, one of them failed off, and we haven't hot fired that. We did 2 docked hot fires at ISS, and we've chosen not to utilize that thruster at all. But they've experienced a little more stress, I would say, than the previous flight. Even though the deorbit burn was successful on OFT, the first orbit flight test and the second one, these thrusters have experienced more stress, more heating, and so there's a little bit more concern for how they would perform during the deorbit burn, holding the orientation of the vehicle, and then also the maneuvers required after that. We've also learned in the starboard doghouse in particular, there is extra heating that we have just discovered in the last 2 weeks. And looking at the data a little more closely, anytime an orbital maneuvering thruster fires in that doghouse, there's higher heating. And so we had one thruster on OFT2 in 2022 fail off after the deorbit burn. It would not surprise me to see one of the starboard aft thrusters in that doghouse fail off in the deorbit burn for this flight. So I would say a little higher heating, a little bit more thermal, and a little more uncertainty now that we understand the physics a little bit better for crew return. In terms of the preps of the vehicle, we've been getting the vehicle prepared. The team is on the ground, really has gone through and looked at the flight software that's on board. Is there any changes that need to be made to mission data loads? This technique of using a very simplified step sequence has minimized the changes required on mission data loads. They're going to take the actual software that we plan to use and put it through its paces in the facility that's a hardware software integration facility that Boeing has. The team has been doing practice runs in a training facility. When I say the team, the ground team has been doing runs just to make sure they understand the differences between the uncrewed and uncrewed. And really, I think it's, I would say, unconnecting muscle memory almost. If you've been training for 2 years to do things a certain way with the flight control team on the ground, with the crew on board, where you can make calls to the crew to do certain actions, they now have to take those actions. And so they've been doing those practices. And there's an integrated simulation next week on Wednesday with the ISS flight control team. The undock sequence is always an orchestrated series of events between how ISS gets configured, how we depress the interface between Starliner and the ISS, how we configure the guidance navigation control for the space station and the software. And so they're going to do that integrated practice next Wednesday. And we'll take our time. If that goes well, we'll pick an undock date. And if it doesn't, we need more simulations, we'll go ahead and pivot. We've laid out a schedule that allows us the opportunity to have some flexibility in Starliner undock, and that's been very important for Dana and I.
Guys, Steve Stitch just laid down a very interesting piece of information that I frankly haven't heard before. That kind of changes my whole point of view on this. I've been saying it's inexperience, right? And I'm saying it's inexperience with poppet seals when it comes to thruster overheating. But something very interesting, he said something very interesting. Now, don't get me wrong, this could still be inexperience, but it's very clear that these same exact thrusters on Starliner, on the 3 different missions, have experienced differential thermal loads. Which is interesting. Now, why is that interesting? Well, I was kind of running off the notion up until this point that OFT2 had the same exact problem. They blew out a thruster on OFT2. I knew they did that, and I'm pretty dang sure, as far as I can tell, that it was the same thing. Right? However, it blew out at a completely different phase of the mission, which is very interesting. That's kind of very telling. So my question now would be, Why did you encounter more heating on the CFT-1 mission than you did on the OFT-2 mission? What did you do differently? And why wasn't that taken into account? Look, man, if you're gonna fly a different trajectory as your orbital test flight 2 mission, is the validation mission for the crew flight, you fly a different trajectory. That's the only thing I can really think of. They wouldn't change something, like, let me put it to you like this. They'd be crazy to change something on the design between the OFT-2 and CFT-2 mission, unless it wasn't a very, very big deal to change. You wouldn't, the thruster blocks, as far as I can tell, haven't changed very much between the 3 designs. It's more the control systems has. So the software, because OFT-1 was a colossal mess up, right? So what changed? What changed? And why wasn't that taken into account? Now, once again, it's possible that the changes that were implemented were very difficult to test for. It's possible, but also that flight data of a thruster blowing out, even if it's after entry and descent and landing, like what Steve Stitch said, he said they had this exact same problem. Even if it was at a phase of the mission when the thruster wasn't needed anymore, that kind of stuff shouldn't be ignored, because that will come back to bite you. There's a reason why NASA is making such a big deal about Orion's heat shield. Orion came back just fine from Artemis 1, but the heat shield popped off in a way that they didn't expect. It came apart. Don't get me wrong, if there were people on board, it would have been fine. Would have been just fine. They would have been okay. But failing to sit there and do your due diligence and understand why this happens, right? That doesn't, just because the heat shield came through this time doesn't mean it doesn't mean it'll do it last. It's very clear. We've seen from the shuttle missions that they had debris strikes on the way up, and it came back down and it wasn't a big deal. They had O-rings fail on SRBs. They sent it up. It came back down and it wasn't a big deal. And failing to understand that behavior and still launching makes it a big deal, because what can go wrong will go wrong, right? Murphy's Law. It'll always come back to bite you. Always. So that's very interesting that they saw this behavior at a point, at a different phase in the mission on OFT-2, and somebody said, oh, that's not a big deal. It's at the end of the mission. It's fine. At least that's what I got from that. That's what I was able to surmise there. That, once again, kind of goes all into, well, this behavior was clearly known. What made you think you weren't going to see it again? Right? That's very interesting. Why would you even bother putting crew on it if you blew out a freaking thruster on the uncrewed test flight? What that's a big red flag. Yeah, probably, Joe. Yeah.
Discovery, go
Hey, Clockwork. Yeah, there you go. Right on, man. Thank you. Yeah, Mike sounds weird. I don't. Test 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Voice check 5 by 5. Next flame trench is going to be extra spicy. I don't know. Maybe. Corporate greed, Kappa. Yeah, I mean, cheers for this rundown, man. Gonna have to watch the VOD to see what you missed. No problem, Jor. Yeah. Mike's good. My question here is, what were the duty cycles during each failure? Were your control systems different? Why would the duty cycles change? Why would you allow something like that to happen? Hellfish, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have been able to see that. Hindsight's obviously 20/20, but I will tell you this right now. Okay, guys, let me a little bit of story time. Bree, I know we got to get going. I understand it's Saturday. Just give me a second. All right. So, do you guys know Joe Barnard? Joe Barnard, the guy that he launches the rockets that come back down and land, the little model rockets. You guys know Joe? He's a good dude. He's from my neck of the woods, believe it or not. Once upon a time, back in 2015, I hate that I have to say that like that, but me and Das wanted to live stream one of Joe's launches, okay? And I learned a very valuable lesson from this about spaceflight, okay? And I get it. It's a freaking model rocket. I understand. I get it, right? I get it. And Joe, if you're watching this, I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I didn't know any better at the time. So We live streamed his rocket launch, and it failed. The thing went up. The rocket got snagged on an umbilical. Because Joe builds like a launch pad for it. It has umbilicals. In the umbilical and the detach was a Cat 5 that had the clip filed off, so it pops out right when the rocket goes. Because Joe does some pretty awesome stuff. He's been cooking solid rocket fuel in his garage for like the past year, which is pretty rad. Please go follow him. He's a great dude. Awesome. He's a space nutcase. The guy's amazing. Shameless plug for that channel. So we were live streaming his rocket launch in a park in Boston, right? It was Hyde Park, if you really want to know. And the rocket failed, and it snagged an umbilical, and then it shot off to the side and shot across the field, right? When, obviously you didn't want it to go that way. You wanted it to go that way, right? Now, it's very interesting. Before that launch, okay, before we went and launched that, all right, we tried to launch it once before, and it didn't do it. And then we kind of, we restarted it and sent it through again. The first time it launched and it didn't go, we walked back up to the pad, and I noticed the umbilical that he had was kind of like halfway out, right? It was kind of halfway out. Like, it wasn't fully in the rocket. And now, I don't know if that was the problem. I don't remember. But then I tried to push it back in, right? And I noticed that it just kind of, because like I said, it was a Cat 5 with the clip coming off. So it's designed to slide out, right? And then I noticed, because of that, we went into the night, right? It started getting cold because it was in April or something, right? And I noticed the Cat 5 that he was using, try to put it in, it was very stiff because it was cold, right? It was super stiff. So I tried to get that umbilical to go back in. I just kind of adjusted it once. I didn't really pay much mind. I'm like, it doesn't have the clip. It'll be fine, right? And then we went to launch it again, and it snagged on that damn umbilical, right? It snagged on it, and instead of going up and getting this awesome rocket launch that came back down and did a propulsive landing with solid rocket, Estes motors, the thing got snagged on the umbilical, shot that way, and shot across the field and exploded, right? Now, I thought about that, and I was like, was it the umbilical? Was that the problem? And I went back and looked. It snagged on the exact freaking umbilical that I wasn't, it had popped out. So I put it back in, right? And I had asked Joe, is this good? And he's like, yeah, it's fine, right? Because I noticed it popped out. I didn't say anything about it later, right? But that taught me a pretty damn valuable lesson. And that lesson is, it's basically what NASA talks about all the time. I have firsthand experience with, look, man, if it's not doing what you want and you still send it, something bad is going to happen. You have to be absolutely 100% sure. Now, how does that pertain to Starliner? If the OFT-2 mission had come back down and I was running this program and I learned that one of the thrusters blew out on entry, descent, and landing, even after, well, it doesn't matter. It was, it computer compensated and it was fine. Thruster blowout, is it? No. No. You don't let something like that slide. No. You would never let something like that slide. I know enough, like, once again, EJ, you played with model rockets one time, blah, blah, blah. You learned this. No, trust me. It's more than that. I've been listening to these press conferences for a decade. It's the same thing. It really is. It's a valuable lesson, right?
Discovery, go at throttle.
Another thing about this is Route 154. I drove a truck across the United States in 2021 with my wife, right, guys? And, we would drive and we would live stream it, and then we would stop, and then we'd get up in the morning, and I'd look over the truck, check the fluids, make sure because it's an old truck, I'd check the fluids, make sure the fluids are good, make sure all the lugs are tight. And we had finished a long drive from the Grand Canyon, from Mather Point, where I proposed to my wife, which was awesome. And we drove all the way to Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's a long way. And it was at night. And we didn't get a lot of sleep that night. And when we left Santa Fe, New Mexico, right, that one time, I didn't check the lugs. And guess what? Drove through Santa Fe, New Mexico, through Amarillo, Texas, into Oklahoma City, right? Spent the night at Oklahoma City, and I was thinking, oh, the truck should be good now. If a problem would have happened, it would have happened. Didn't check it again. Driving through Tulsa, Oklahoma, guess what? The frickin' wheel came off because the lugs were loose. Or there was the differential, which was welded, probably decided to unweld itself. It was one or the other, but I didn't check the lug, so I'm never going to be sure which one it was. See what I mean? Valuable lesson right there. Make sure your homework's done, right? Why was the decision made with Starliner to be cool with a thruster blowing out on a test flight and then sending crew on it and being so confident that that problem would not happen again? See, it comes back to bite you. Physics will come back to bite you. It always does, unless you're sure. That's why I always stress you have to be sure, because if you don't, you're going to pay for it. Was it a dually? No. It's a 97 F250 HD, 5.8 with a 5-speed, 4x2. It's a nice truck. I still have it. And I always make sure the stupid lug nuts are tight just in case. And I haven't had a wheel fall off since then. That's weird. And then when we went to do it again, I did it again earlier this year in a different truck, right? Me and my buddy Ernok, a viewer in chat, he bought an 87 F350 dually, right? And the dually, we pulled it out of a field essentially, and it showed signs that the brake light came on, right? And instead of being like, it's fine, I was preemptive about that and figured out that it blew out 2 brakes on the rear, and we fixed it. And then I once-overed that entire damn truck to make sure everything was good, and we never had a problem, except the radiator. But, yeah, hey, you're not expecting a pound of dirt to come out of the radiator, but that's another story. And we ended up fixing that, and we still never had a problem. Lufus made it entirely across the country, 4,500 miles in a 37-year-old truck. No problems. You have to make sure you do this right. If you don't, it's going to come, physics will come back to bite you. It has a nasty way of doing that.
Next question is from Jeff Faust from Space News.
Good afternoon. Question for Ken Bowersox or Steve Stitch. You mentioned earlier in the briefing that it was a very close decision on deciding to bring back Starliner uncrewed. I'm wondering if you can quantify that in some way. Was there some particular piece of data or missing piece of data that really swayed that decision, that very close decision? Thank you.
So I'll give it from my point of view, the answer, and then Steve can weigh in. If you look at it, we knew going in that the crewed flight test was probably a little higher risk than a typical rotation with Dragon, where we've flown multiple flights. That's why we called it a flight test, right? We had the issues coming uphill, and that raised our risk level and our uncertainty in how much more risk there was. Anytime you change from your nominal plan that you've spent years developing, you increase risk on the other side. And the type of risks I'm talking about are something that we've analyzed for contingency return with the crew on the mid-deck of the Dragon, or the necessity of sending up new suits where the crews weren't able to try out the pressure suits on the ground so that they would have suits on the Dragon. Those types of things raise your risk a little bit on that side. And so now both of your risk levels have gone up, and you knew going in that one was a little bit higher, and you've got uncertainty on just where it fits. So you have to really dig in to understand what the baseline risk change is. And that's what the team has been working so hard this last couple of months. For me, one of the really important factors is that we just don't know how much we can use the thrusters on the way back home before we encounter a problem, because of the heating effects that happened on the way uphill. But Steve can tell you a lot more.
No, thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'll just mention a couple things. One, we had some thruster experts come in and talk to us a few weeks ago, and we are clearly operating this thruster at a higher temperature at times than it was designed for. I think that was a factor that, as we started to look at the data a little bit more carefully, we're operating the thruster outside of where it should be operated in. Understanding, could the thruster just fail off gracefully, or could there be another failure mode that is not so graceful? I think that was an important factor as we talked about the two differences. I mentioned the starboard doghouse, and so for some reason the heating is higher in that starboard doghouse that we do not understand. When an OMAC thruster fires, the other thrusters get heated at a much higher rate than we expected. We don't have a closed loop model to predict the performance. We tried. We worked very hard of trying to anchor a model based on what we saw at White Sands, and then knowing what you had in the uphill phase, knowing that you have a model that can replicate what we saw, can you predict the downhill? We really just couldn't get there over the last number of weeks. Also, how close we were to a cliff. In other words, we've damaged the Teflon on some thrusters. So when we start to fire them again, will that damage repeat or get back to a point where now the thrusters are at the levels we saw on the docking day very quickly? And then really it's the consequences of failure. When we started thinking about the kind of failures we might get, we had those on docking day, and those were even though we were 200 meters from station, it's a very benign environment. This sequence, when the deorbit burn has to execute and then you get into the SEP sequence, it's a very rapid sequence from the completion of the burn to then getting into the separation a number of minutes later, and there's no real time to reconfigure. So when we laid it all out, that's where the preponderance of the risk was to not put a crew on the vehicle.
Our next question is from Manisha Ravisetti from Space.com.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. I think my question is mostly for Dana. I was wondering what are some of the challenges that you faced in accommodating this delay with ISS operations? I would guess that there are maybe changes you have to make with food allocation or other supply and task division. And then relatedly, you mentioned that even with the 2025 planned return date, it is the trip is within the scope of what you're comfortable with, for astronauts traveling to the ISS. So what do you think would have been too long for this day, and the point at which we should be, worried about the fact that they're still up there? Thank you.
Let's see, for the first part of your question, just at a high level from a programmatic standpoint, we protect for about 4 months of what we call consumables reserve. So food, water, different kinds of consumables we have on board. Those are the two biggies. 4 months for 4 crew is what we protect for. So we always stay above that amount. And we do that intentionally so that if we had a problem with the delivery, a cargo flight that didn't make it, for example, we'd have margin. So we always have a little more than what we need for some period of time. It's not limitless. In this particular case, we did have a resupply mission. In fact, just a few weeks ago, the Northrop Grumman 21 flight came up, so we had our eye on that flight. And so once we realized the team was working through issues and we were likely to have Butch and Sunny on board, we changed that flight's manifest. So we added more supplies to keep us above that reserve level. We've also got the SpaceX 31 cargo flight coming up around the corner, so we've got extra supplies on that. And so we've been able to modify and adjust our cargo mission supplies to accommodate the extra mouths we're feeding. No one has had to go on a diet or calorie restrictions, so we haven't had any limitations there. In terms of duration on board, you ask an interesting question. One of the things as an agency that's really important for us is to understand the impacts of long duration space flight on the crew. And so far our experience base and that of the cosmonaut experience base is up to about 12 months, give or take. And so we understand very well performance implications and what it looks like for operations and crew health there. So you're asking the question about how long is too long. I don't think we as an agency know the answer to that. We can tell you that we understand what 12 months does. We're interested in that from Moon to Mars. And those are some of our research objectives and what we're trying to learn in the microgravity environment, but no specific concerns with 8 months or even up to a year. And so far, our data suggests that as long as we've got the right mitigations on board, exercise, the crew spends about 2.5 hours a day with cardio and weightlifting, and as long as we can keep them in shape with rigorous routines, et cetera, we've done a pretty good job keeping the crew's health up with long duration stay.
Next question is from Tim Fernholtz from Payload Space.
Thank you for taking my question this morning. I was just curious if you have any thoughts now on what might have been done to avoid this scenario after OFT2, if more attention should have been paid to redesigning the propulsion system, or if there were decisions that should have been made during the test campaign to avoid the scenario. Thank you.
That's my question.
Yeah, I'll take the question. I think if we look back at OFT2 now with this newer lens of what we learned at White Sands, certainly could we have explored OFT2 in a little more detail, either leading to some redesign of the doghouse to get the thermal environment lower or operate the thrusters differently. I think it's easy to do that in hindsight. If we went back and thought about the whole integrated problem a little bit more, could we have done some kind of testing? What I would say is it's very difficult to test the doghouse environment on the ground. You've got thrusters that fire in multiple directions, and it's very hard on the ground to have a test facility, a vacuum chamber that accommodates thruster firings in multiple directions. And then get the thermal right in that doghouse and keep the thermal up. So there was no easy way to do that test on the ground. We thought, obviously, we had done enough analysis to show that the thrusters would be within the temperatures that they were qualified for. Clearly, there were some misses back in qualification. We're going to go through that data in more detail post-flight and then figure out what we can do to go fix them. And then we'll also look at our process. I would say we're going to look at the certification process. I know Boeing's looking at their process as well. on how they got here. We're doing the same thing on the NASA side.
Dude, he's right. Steve Stitch is exactly right. He's right in this regard, but also, you know, I don't know how you can say, I'm not sure how, like, and I'm not one to push the answers because I'm trying to learn. But, you know, he says it's extremely hard to test it on the ground, and that is correct. I've told you that many times. But you had flight data that suggested otherwise. You had flight data. Like, what do you mean it's hard to say in hindsight is 2020? Is your flight rationale okay with blowing out thrusters? Like, did I hear that right? Like, no, they're working together, Rourke. NASA has basically been using Boeing commercial spacecraft as a sock puppet since 2019, since they screwed up so bad on OFT-1. Right? Like, you know, like I said, it's very easy to say this hindsight is 2020, but hindsight wasn't 2020. The data was right there. It was right in front of you. So at some point, somebody made the decision to be okay with thrusters blowing out. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not about pointing fingers and saying, oh, this person's an idiot. This person's wrong, right? That's not what this is about. What it is about is the data. I told you guys, feelings don't freaking matter. Your opinion or your gut feeling means dick in the spaceflight industry. That means nothing. The data is telling you something. It always tells you something. Just like that stupid umbilical that I was telling you guys about on Joe's rocket. Dude, it's right in front of you. Inexperience is not knowing when it's right in front of you. You got to know to look for this stuff. It seems like they didn't, which is once again, very strange considering Starliner's operational thermal regime was basically above rated load for these thrusters. And B, you had thruster blowouts on both previous missions. Like, what the actual frick, dude? Like, come on. The data's right there. I'm an idiot, and I can see that. Like, now, once again, you know, Steve said they have to go fix process. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you have to. Yeah. But once again, he is right in the context that this is hard to test on the ground. But you had flight data that suggested that your ground testing data was not adequate because you blew a thruster out. Somebody was cool with that at some point, and I think whatever process led to that approval probably should be scrapped. Maybe Boeing hid it from them. Don't suggest malice to what you could attribute to incompetence, Mohawk. I'm telling you, this is inexperience 100%. I'm very confident in this. Dude, they are inexperienced. It shows. It's not my opinion. Look at what happened. They didn't know enough to realize that blowing out a thruster was a huge deal and could come back to bite you later. That reeks of inexperience. That inexperience, now Mohawk, hear me out. That inexperience is coming from the people that had experience with these thrusters being fired because the shuttle program went out. And then they decided to use components from the shuttle to make a new capsule. And they brought in new engineers and new technicians. Guess what, man? This is the thing that I'm talking about. If you guys are familiar with Destin, Smarter Every Day, he did a video a little while ago telling basically about how we need to make sure we're on our game with the Artemis program. The Artemis program is arguably harder than the Apollo program, yet we don't see the readiness and we don't see the experience here, like monthly meetings about the state of the program. We don't see any of that. The Artemis program is harder to do. It's an infinitely more complicated architecture, hopefully more sustainable in the long run. You know, not sustainable meaning sustainable on the ground, but you actually launch people to the moon and stay there, right? Destin's video basically says you have to you get your stuff together. You have to make sure, or you know, if you don't, you're going to run into this, right? You know, we think because we went to the moon 50 years ago that we can trade on that knowledge. We absolutely can't. This is very good evidence of that. The only people that have seen any relative success are the people that didn't trade on past knowledge. Guess who that is? I'll give you 3 guesses. The people that are building a giant stainless steel water tower in Texas right now. They did everything from scratch, everything from the ground up. except for a couple fundamental components. Fast track for the Merlin 1D turbopump, but whatever. And integrated power head demo from the Air Force Research Laboratory for hydrostatic turbopumps for Raptor. But if you look at the IPHC demo and you look at Raptor, they don't even look like they're the same motor. Okay. See what I'm saying? You can't trade on that past knowledge. You can't, even if you think you can. No, you cannot. I'm telling you, this is inexperience. Does Boeing need to get their crap straight on a managerial level? Yeah. Because some managers said, no, let's get rid of all the people that work on these thrusters, but just keep the thrusters because I want to save money. You can be sure of that. That is absolutely what happened. And that's a problem. But like I said, sins of our fathers. You can't hold the people on the Starliner program. You have to. You have to hold them responsible to some extent. But they can't be held responsible for that decision. If anything, whoever was management, whoever made that decision at the time is what set them up to fail. Like, badly. And you can't really go blaming fingers for that. You have to take accountability and fix the damn problem. Because sitting there and pointing fingers is what got us in this position in the first place. You have to take accountability. You have to take ownership of that problem and fix it. I'm sorry, that's just how this works. Yeah, maybe.
Next question is from Sawyer Rosenstein from NASASpaceflight.com.
Hey, my buddy.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. Earlier you mentioned that there would be a simplified undocking procedure. Can you kind of explain what that means of what this undocking would be like compared to, say, with crew, and what the contingency would be if there is an issue at some point with that undocking and burn away from the station?
Yeah, I can answer the question. So normally we would back away from the space station, essentially go out in front and then above the space station, and then eventually end up below the space station and then on a trajectory that goes beneath it and out in front of the space station. That was our normal plan to undock, heading into the flight, before the flight. Now what we're going to do is execute a small number. The undocking itself with the NASA docking system will be exactly the same. We'll use the same techniques. The software will command undocking. We'll drive a sequence of hooks. They'll open up after we've depressurized that area in between the vehicles, and then we'll undock. And there's some springs that push the vehicle away. What we'll do is we'll go through a step sequence that puts us on, I would say, what's called a posigrade trajectory. And so we'll end up going, essentially phasing out behind the space station to a safe distance, and then we'll get away from the space station, execute the deorbit burn. So we've used that kind of step sequence in the past in other vehicles. We've tested this step sequence. It is already in the software. It's one of the breakout sequences that are already in the software. And so what we'll do is just go command that sequence early and use that to get away more quickly. And so it's pretty simple. It's pretty elegant. It was a great idea by the Boeing team.
They're most likely doing that because that maneuver going up and over like that, like he's talking about, could be more thruster intensive because you have to station keep for a longer period of time. And once again, what Eric said in his article in ours is that Starliner could have a collision scenario. That was probably the result of the discussion that came to this conclusion, most likely. So there's your context for what Eric was writing about. I don't think the technical accuracy of that is necessarily right? To just put out there, it could crash into the space station without context, I think is a little foolish, but hey, there you go. That's the reason, that's what he heard. So his sources are pretty good, but once again, you're not getting the full picture there. See what I'm saying? That's why, I said, with that, it's hard to take an anonymous source into analysis because you don't know. Now we have context there, so that's good.
Our next question is from David Curley from Full Throttle.
Absolutely, Mikey. You don't want the capsule hitting the space station. That's not good. That would be bad. Simultaneously, you don't want the capsule following a trajectory where it could pulse its thrusters into the solar panels. And if they get into a scenario where a thruster blows out from doing this more complicated over-the-top space station maneuver, you don't want to have the capsule start spinning out of control and then shoot thruster blasts at the solar panels, because then they turn into sails. Yeah, the whole ISS will become a giant sailboat. And now, I'm not going to sit here and say that wouldn't be kind of cool, but also, at the same time, the ISS is, in fact, not a sailboat. So having it work like one is unintended. You don't want that. That's the lesson for the day. The ISS is not a sailboat.
Thank you very much. Steve Stitch and Bower Sox. I think I heard Stitch say that White Sands testing was kind of the turning point for you, and I thought Bower Sox kind of went in a little different direction there. And it seems to me that Boeing and NASA drew different conclusions from those tests. NASA believing that there were potential for losing some of the thrusters. Boeing said at the time that they got pretty close to root cause and were probably within reasonable risk to use them. So did you get to two different conclusions? And was it actually the key factor, the White Sands test, that led to this decision today? And did I hear that you're not ruling out the potential of a 4-person crew for a next Starliner flight?
So let me start with the first question. I think Steve was talking about how we process the data. I was talking about being encouraged by the fact that we had new data. Anytime you have new data, it means that you can analyze it and find out that things are proceeding well, and you can converge the team with that new data. What Steve found was maybe a little bit different, and that's why it probably sounded different how we reacted.
I would say at White Sands we were excited, and that was really a turning point in that we were able to replicate the loss of thrust. We simulated the uphill profile, in other words, how the thrusters fired from the launch sequence and on orbit all the way to docking. We did 2 of those uphill sequences, and then we did a number of downhills. And so we were encouraged when we saw that we could actually see thrust degradation in those downhill runs. What then was new is once we took the thruster apart and we looked at the valve on the oxidizer side, we saw this swelling on the Teflon seat, which when we talked to the vendor, Aerojet Rocketdyne, they had never seen this before in this particular thruster. And so I think that's where there was a change in the risk posture. Initially, we were somewhat excited by replicating the damage, or the degradation in the thrust, but then when we looked a little more closely, we saw this swelling on the Teflon, and then that gave us a whole new idea of the physics involved in the failure mode, and then that led us to study that failure mode a lot more in the last few weeks. Relative to the 4-person Starliner crew, we haven't really had those discussions yet. We need to get the vehicle back. We need to work through our sequence of events on what changes we'll make, both for the helium leaks and the thrusters, and then we'll make a decision on the next flight. It's a little premature to discuss that.
Next question is from David Denault from About Space Today.
Good afternoon. I'd like to see if we can get an individual consensus across the panel. We've talked about the voting. What about the risk assessment? Was it a 50-50 possibility of coming back? Was it a 75-25 decision or a 90-10 decision that Starliner would be safe?
See, the press always frames this, and I'm not 100% sure why they do this. See, once again, I'm not trying to bark up anybody's tree, just explaining context. The press always frames this as some kind of evil council, I say they die, I say they come back. No, I say they fly on Dragon. Evil council, I got your message. They always frame it like it's some Game of Thrones thing or something. No, that's undoubtedly because they're trying to get a story or something, right? But that's not really how this works. These reviews are there to discuss flight rationale. It's not well, I disagree with you because I don't like Boeing. And the Boeing guy going, no, I must think of the shareholders. That is not how those reviews happen. I've never sat in on one, but I know enough that that's not really how that works. They're sitting there discussing flight rationale, and the whole point of these reviews isn't to necessarily vote on the decision. It's to present the information from everyone who has a stakeholder expectation in this capsule, and to try and get a good cross section of your what's called flight rationale. I learned about flight rationale a month ago. I knew of it, but I learned about the context of it from a Wayne Hale blog, right? Wayne Hale was an ex-shuttle flight controller who has a blog on the internet that he posts about this kind of stuff. It's a very great resource tool for teaching what the mentality that you need for being a flight director, because he was one for 30 years. These missions, these review boards are there to kind of convene all this information and then make a decision based off that. It's not like they're putting all these decisions into a hat and then tallying up the votes. It's there to convene all this information and make a decision based off that. The press tries to always frame it it's a misunderstanding. I don't know if they're intentionally trying to misunderstand it. Probably not. It's probably they probably just don't understand the context, which once again, it's fine. Nobody's going to be a freaking huge aerospace nerd like we are. Like, I get it, right? Gentlemen, from this day forward, you will all refer to me by the name Betty. And I'll bet you that that's what they're going to talk about here, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see if I win.
Well, Starliner still has to come back uncrewed, right? And we believe that Starliner coming back uncrewed, although higher than the risk we'd be willing to take to put crew on it, is a reasonable thing to do to finish the test flight and gather the data that we want to gather. To give you a percentage on polling or how people feel, I think that's pretty tough
really
to do.
how that works.
All I can say for sure is that when we polled today, all the people that we asked from the senior management of the different organizations that are involved with human spaceflight, they all concurred that we should have the crew come down on a different vehicle than the current Starliner.
See what I mean? All the stakeholders kind of agreed to that, right? The way they talk about dissenting opinion at these reviews is like the Boeing people on one side of the table and the NASA people on the other side of the table, like it's some contract negotiation. It ain't no contract negotiation. You go and you present the data and you make a decision based off of the data presented. And it was a unanimous decision across the board. See what I'm talking about? It's not really how this, it's not like some evil council, I didn't get my way. It's not that. That's not how these reviews work.
Our next question is from Marvin Marshall from the Space Report News.
They don't work like that.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is for Administrator Nelson. I'm speaking on behalf of millions who share, the same concern. Given that SpaceX operates 4, soon to be 5 Crew Dragons and 3 cargo Dragons, they can resolve anomalies in days or weeks rather than, months or years, all while receiving, a few billion less than Boeing. So we're just, curious, why does NASA continue to support a company, with a history like this? We get the rationale with that.
With a history like what? With a history like what? What? Because in 2014, everybody thought the 737 MAX was a piece of junk? Give me a break, dude. Sorry. Got it. Technical. NASA wants to field 2 capsules. And look, man, unless somebody else just comes out of the woodwork with a crew-rated capsule, Jeff Bezos, I'm looking at you. If somebody wants to come around with a crew capsule, then NASA could consider other options. But you got to remember, fielding a 3rd capsule at this point, it takes time to ramp up a program like this. The Commercial Crew program has been going since 2014, right? It's been going since 2014. And there was no, in 2014, everybody thought Boeing was the best thing ever, right? And maybe they were. There's like, nobody could have predicted what happened. Like, you couldn't have said that. I mean, there are certain people that, probably said that it's probably not a good idea, but that's another story. But right now, in this particular context, not supporting both capsules, despite the cost incurred, would just that's wasting money at this point. Yeah. And the guy's like, how can you continue going forward with that? Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Yeah, how can you continue going forward? Like I said, we're on the 5-yard line here, man. We got a breakaway. No offsides. All right? Like, I switched to soccer there for a second. But you just kick the ball in the goal. You're 95% of the way there. Or kick a field goal of football or score a touchdown. You get what I'm trying to say. You're almost there. You're way closer to finishing this thing and getting this thing ready to go than not. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't. That's a gotcha question. I hate gotcha questions. I hate them. It's really annoying. I get it. The news needs a story. I understand it. I understand. But you're trying to, like, even their gotcha questions are trying to make, the gotcha question demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding about how the entire program works. And I find that very disrespectful to the process. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Boeing doesn't deserve some disrespect right now. That whole thing with the thrusters is dude, the red flags were there. It's there. It's just like the O-rings with Challenger. They were there. The red flags are there. The information, the data doesn't freaking lie. Okay? Physics doesn't lie. All right? It doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't. Like, the data is inalienable, right? Like, it's unless you have a bad sensor, in which case prove you have a bad sensor. You know what I mean? I don't like questions like this because you're once again, it's like, the evil council. That's not how this works at all. Like, are you even paying attention?
Have two options to ensure, reliability and redundancy, but, that's what you get with SpaceX's ability to operate multiple spacecraft, quickly address anomalies, everything they do. So, again, just speaking on behalf of millions, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing?
What is your question?
See, Bill's going to grill this fool. He's going to cook this fool right now. Watch. He's pissed. See, he knows. He knows it's a gotcha question. He's pissed. Watch. Grill this fool, man. Rightly deserved. Should be shunned for asking a stupid question like that.
Why do we continue to fund Boeing? What are the problems when SpaceX?
Is your question, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing?
Yes.
For the obvious reason that, number one, we need two spacecraft to have the redundancy in case one is not available to take crew to and from the International Space Station. Number two, this is according to an arm's length contract, and a contract that is a fixed price contract. And number three, Boeing has been a great partner for NASA over the years. As a matter of fact, the big Space Launch System, the SLS rocket, is overall managed by Boeing, and there has been a long history with Boeing. The fourth reason is that they were the successful bidder along with SpaceX, because we had wanted two. So for all those reasons, that's why NASA does business with Boeing.
So I'd also like to add, Boeing operates the space station for us as well as the prime contractor for space station, and that's in its 25th year. So we have a long and storied history with them there also.
See, that's the other thing. I mean, Jim's right. Boeing operates.
Yeah, Boeing
operates the space station, right? But I mean, once again, I don't like the context of that question, because how can you say that, we could trust Boeing? Boeing's the prime contractor on the core stage, main propulsion system, which on SLS's first flight performed flawlessly. No problems. If anything, if you've learned anything from this, you know good and well that that's a very rare thing to happen. But yet it did it perfectly fine on the first try. Now, it's not to say that they weren't late. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were a little late. Yeah, that's something to consider. But also, it worked fine. What is this guy trying to get at? Like, this is a new capsule. There's inexperience. It happens. Now, once again, the optics are awful. Like, I'm not going to sit there and pretend they're not. But
been a great partner with us on Space Station, and I think the key word is partner. A lot of people want to focus on the contractual relationship where we're buying something from a company. This isn't completely like that, right? I mean, we have a contract with Boeing, but it's to work together to develop this capability for our country.
Ridiculous question.
And we've had two good partners, Boeing and SpaceX, when it comes to commercial crew. And when they have problems, we don't just throw rocks at them or tell them that we don't like them. We work with them to get through those problems.
Our next question is from Jackie Goddard.
I want to add some context there. It looks like Bill actually didn't hear the question. I thought he was getting annoyed, but it may have been him trying to... I'm not going to rule out the possibility that he may have actually not heard what the question was, but I'm pretty sure he was trying to get the guy to look stupid. Rightly so. Rightly so. I mean, that's kind of the stuff I'm kind of trying not to do. I'm trying to give you guys context and understand this, right? But yeah.
Goddard from the Times of London.
Yes, hello, thank you. And just following on from that, can you help us understand why Boeing aren't here and what we're to conclude from that? You used to brief jointly. And whatever the reason may be, was there any discussion around what their absence might communicate to the public? Boeing has been adamant that Starliner is safe. You folks aren't there. We hear that the legacies of Challenger and Columbia have helped to guide your caution at NASA. So how concerned should the public be at the implication that learning curve at Boeing possibly differs? Thank you.
Learning curve. Good question. Good question. I mean, any new endeavor in spaceflight is going to be difficult to do. It's your first time doing it. But her first question is another question that I had. Where the hell's Mark? Where's Mark Nappy? Don't say he's hard at work. It's Saturday. That's a question that I'm not going to answer. I'm willing to hear the answer. I want to hear what they have to say, because a Saturday press conference, the guy that runs the Starliner program isn't here. What the heck? That, like, once again, guys, I'm usually not like, oh, the optics, like, I usually like, screw that. We want technical analysis, but that can't be ignored. You can't, like, that's such a glaring thing. Like, the guy that runs the program isn't here to talk about in a press conference that's about his capsule, his company's capsule. Dude, a lot of you guys say I cope hard, right? When it comes to this, I'm just trying to look at the technical situation here. However, that's very telling. It's very telling. You can't sit here and say that that's an accident, right?
Well, I'll take the first part, and it looks like Jim's getting ready to take the second part. But the reason Boeing's not here is it was a NASA decision today, crewed, uncrewed. That was the focus of this review, and so we thought it was reasonable to have just NASA on this panel. Jim, anything you want to add?
I think that's correct, Ken, and then I'd add, I think Ken and Steve have characterized that Boeing was part of the decision process. They've characterized what Boeing's position was, so and we're here to communicate the overall NASA position.
Okay. You know what? I ain't saying nothing. You guys talk amongst yourselves.
Next question is from Natalie LaRoche from the Boston Globe.
Hi there. Thank you so much, everyone, for the answers to your questions. It was mentioned earlier that their families are their pillars of strength right now. I was just wondering how apprised their families are in this whole process, and if you could describe what their spirits are during these times.
As a resident of Massachusetts for the last 36 years, I apologize for the Boston Globe. Yep. I apologize. Sorry about that. My fault. My bad. Yep. I'll take accountability for that one. No, the Canadian government has apologized for Bryan Adams on several occasions. You Canadians are all the same. Your beady little eyes are playing. You try to said that. So. Jeez.
Okay, I think if I heard your question right, it was how the families are doing and how we support the families. Again, as I said previous, families are the pillars of strength and support. Their families are doing well. Their families understand, just like the crew members when they launch, there's always an opportunity, there's always a possibility that they could be up there much longer than they anticipate. So the families understand that. I'm not saying it's not hard. It is hard. It's difficult. You have to adjust for that. We have a support structure for the astronauts, and it's there to support the families and the crew members on orbit. So they're doing well. They understand. And again, we thank them for what they do.
All right, we have time for one more question. So to close this out, the last question will be from Bill Harwood from CBS News.
Hi, thanks for
thank you very much. A question for Senator Nelson, if I can. All my technical questions were answered, so I have a political question for you. There's been a lot of talk during the past few weeks that we live in an environment today where one presidential candidate is the chairman of the National Space Council, and we live in an environment where criticism is thrown about. I don't know what word to even use for it. The question is this: is there, in your mind anyway, did politics and the ramifications of this decision, if it didn't go well, play any role at all in your decision, your personal decision, Senator, about how to proceed with this?
Even if it did, he wouldn't say. Bill's going to say the decision is made by the people that know. Even if it was, he would not say it.
Was politics even in the back of your mind when you guys were talking about all this? Thanks.
Bill, if anyone knows, you know that NASA is not only bipartisan, it is nonpartisan. And that's the way we've tried to operate this agency as long as I've been here. I can tell you unequivocally, from a personal standpoint, that politics has not played any part in this decision. What I said earlier about Challenger and Columbia and the lessons learned and what we've tried to change in a culture in order that safety is our North Star is what we are trying to do in a very hostile environment in which if you make a mistake, it's very unforgiving. So I can tell you unequivocally, I have seen some speculation in the press that because we are in an election season, that decisions may have been made with regard to this announced today with regard to an election. Absolutely has nothing to do with it. And as long as I'm around here, it's not going to.
Explain Viper and Chandra then, guy. Yeah, I would like some context there. The hell was Viper? Schedule overlap? Funding overlap? Give me a fucking break. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Technical. Sorry. The Northeast came out for a second there. Apologies.
Thank you, Administrator, and thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned for more information on NASA's Commercial Crew Program blog at blogs.nasa.gov/commercial crew. Have a great afternoon.
My bad. Sorry, I'm trying my best, guys. I'm trying my best. I'm sorry. I was doing good there. Until the end. I'm sorry. I was doing good until the end, man. I almost made it. I missed it by that much. Cryo
Discovery.
Yeah,
Go throttle up.
I don't like doing that. I really don't. I don't like being a dick to NASA. That's not cool. But yeah, I can say that he's probably telling the truth with Starliner. There's not a chance in hell that that's a political decision. You don't even risk it. You have another capsule. Don't risk it. You know, you think these optics are bad. How bad would the optics be if Butch and Sonny got hurt? God forbid. That would be truly bad optics. You know, speaking on behalf of billions, why are we doing spaceflight at all when there's some kitten being forced to eat dry food? Dude, 70s, those questions dude, they drive me up the wall. I'm trying not to let those questions piss me off. I'm really trying, man. I'm trying as hard as I can. It's so difficult sometimes. I think context is important. I'm taking the high road, man. And it's difficult for me, okay? It's difficult. It is difficult to do sometimes, but you know, you can't get hot-headed in this industry, dude. You really can't. You just end up looking like an idiot. So, I mean, I kind of am an idiot, so it kind of works out. So, I would think NASA's entire funding is based on politics. No, Rex said, look, you don't have to like politics, all right? I don't think everybody here is nobody is a fan of NASA because of the politics. But we're here for exploration and scientific understanding. That's why we love space. That's why we do this, right? That's why I do this. But to be ignorant to the fact that NASA and politics aren't conjoined at the hip, I think is very a critical misstep in understanding of why NASA exists in the first place. They're a government organization at the end of the day, guys. Politics is just a part and parcel. You know what I mean? Now, do I like it when people play games with this? No, but it inevitably will happen. And what I try to do is explain the symptom in that context, or why this is happening. You know, if you get infighting at NASA, there's a much bigger thing, because there were times where it worked just fine, like the Apollo program. Apollo program seemed to work just fine at a time where arguably we're more divisive in this country than we are now. Somehow we made it work then. So there's clearly a way to leverage this system correctly. I just think that we don't know how. Or at least there are times in the past where we thought we could, but we didn't. Who knows? But yeah, to not, it's awesome to hate politics and be a huge fan of NASA, but to not understand that NASA and politics, at least when it comes to spaceflight policy, are conjoined at the hip, and there's a lot of stakeholders involved, and there's also a lot of money to be thrown around, I think is a little bit ignorant. You know, not trying to be a jerk. Like, you got to understand that that does play into it, you know, for, you know, because we have the SLS program, you know, it's one launch since 2014, right? One launch in 14 years. That's longer than the entire Apollo program, by the way. You know, but you could sit here and call SLS a jobs program, but at the same time, what was the Apollo program? That was arguably a bigger jobs program with way more money being thrown around, and we made that work. Now, one could argue that it's the circumstances, but, you know, when we look at the Apollo program and we look at President Kennedy's speech, you know, why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. That was a ballsy thing to say, you know. He received a lot of flack for that speech. I believe this nation should commit itself to the goal of sending a man to the surface of the moon and returning him safely to the earth. That challenge serves to organize and measure the best of our skills. That was a ballsy thing to do at the time. You know, there was no political willpower for space flight, but he made it happen. You know what I mean? You know, you could say right now, like, oh, we're not, we're not doing that, but clearly the system can be leveraged to work correctly. And it starts at the top. You know, it's important to understand that context. You know, the system can work. It's worked very well. The ISS is another great example of this. I mean, you could argue the space shuttle too, but 14 people would disagree with you, you know. But you get the idea. Sorry, that was a little out of line, but you get the idea. New research suggests warp drives could revolutionize military space travel. Yeah, well, I was researching, you know, about my moon rocket going to the moon, Shogun, and I talked about it on stream, and I did it in Kerbal. Does that mean it's happening? You can write all the papers you want, dude. Hardware speaks volumes. I'm sorry, talk is cheap in the aerospace industry. Talk is cheap. Show me the hardware, and then we'll talk. Yeah, exactly, Pie Guy. President Kennedy proposed that we go to the moon after Alan Shepard's suborbital flight. We weren't even close to getting that far. So, you know, I think the people that said, like, oh, Apollo can only exist at that right time, in that right political vacuum. No, that's bullcrap. It's bullcrap. It just comes down to, you know, it comes right from the top. You guys are telling me that if we proposed the Apollo program again right now, that the vast majority of people wouldn't be on board? Look at how many people are excited about Artemis, and this doesn't even do anything. Can you imagine what we could do if we did another Apollo program? Just the same thing. See what I'm talking about? You know, one could argue that Apollo only existed because it was the right time. Well, the right time is when, you know, whoever's denoting NASA's policy decides that it's the right time. And Brown had legendary hype skills. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to. It's an inconvenient truth. No, not like that. Not like that. Excelsior! No, not like that. Man Bear Pig is real. It's not something that people like to hear, you know. But that's the truth. NASA is a political entity, and we have to understand that, you know, for as much as we hate politics, politics were also the avenue for us putting flags on another celestial body. It was also for James Webb, Hubble, the ISS, even SpaceX. Seriously. NASA doesn't bail out SpaceX in 2008 in the middle of a freaking recession, I might add. Not a bailout, a contract for commercial orbital transport services. If they don't do that, where are we? That same political system that we all claim to hate, it basically is what saved SpaceX back in the day. And look at what happened. You know what I mean? This is why, just a little bit of a different subject here. This is why I always argue for more money to be spent on space. It doesn't matter where it is, because you never know when something like Elon will come along, right? Exactly. No one's ever going to think it's the right time unless you decide it's the right time. And who decides it's the right time? Well, it comes right from the top, dude. Trying not to do Rule 8, but we really need China to say we will own the moon or Mars. They've been saying that. They've explained their lunar ambitions, Goalie, and it doesn't really seem to affect us. Because we're trading on the past. It's like, why? Okay, have China go to the moon. We were there 50 years ago. Yeah, that's exactly right. You were there 50 years ago. 50 years ago, a half century ago. You know, I'm telling you, man, we need to stop trading on our past success. This generation needs, this generation of spaceflight fans needs, we need our own story. We all, you know, when I was growing up and when I was younger, we always looked at the past spaceflight programs in reverence. And we used that as kind of an excuse to be disdained about current, right? That was notorious through the shuttle program. I'd argue that that disdain with the status quo with NASA is what got us the Commercial Crew program in the first place. However, I don't think we need to do that anymore. It goes back to what I've always said. The Apollo engineers wish they had Falcon 9. You wish you had a rocket like this. You wish you had Starship, man. Heck, I would contend to say that the Apollo engineers wish they had something like SLS. But I mean, they probably would have never let it fly with that crappy upper stage on top of it. But you get the idea. We can't keep trading on our past. That's not how this works. If we had done that in the 60s, the Soviets would have gotten to the moon before us. It's not how we roll here. We don't play that. We don't play this like that. It's ridiculous. The complacency is aggravating as all hell. Why are you more orange today? I have not changed my lighting setup at all. It's probably the blue with the camera, if I had to guess. Give SLS an S4B. Blue Origin seems to have a couple extra of those, Jared. Wouldn't be the worst idea. Sounds cold, but I think once the last moon man dies, then I say America will say, damn, now we need to go. I disagree. But anyway. All right, guys. Well, yes, Bree, we will. Yeah, we'll do that. Anyway. Yeah, Steve, I think that's another good point. You keep saying thruster blowout. Can you put that in car talk? They're getting thrust degradation on the thrusters. On Starliner. They're getting thrust degradation, meaning that they're... Goalie, you know how a fuel injector on a car has an O-ring at the bottom to make sure that the gas doesn't come out? That is getting degraded. The computer is shutting them down. The computer shut down most of them before they got fully degraded, but one of them didn't. So now your O-ring to your PTFE O-ring, or PTFE poppet seal, which is basically a Teflon seal, on your oxidizer side of one of the thrusters could be degraded in such a way that you could leak hypergolic fluid inside of an already extremely hot environment from their thermal analysis. That's the reason why they're not willing to send the crew home. Because if that thing is truly broken and it starts leaking, if this behavior happens to other thrusters and they start leaking, the service module could explode Apollo 13 style. And you definitely don't want to do that during reentry. That's the errant risk. It's very obvious now. Once again, I think that Boeing's rationale in their certainty is pretty dang high. I don't think that would happen. That is a probable outcome. I think Boeing is probably about 95% sure. That's based off of no empirical analysis. It's just what I think. I'm pretty sure they're sure it'll come home okay. NASA doesn't want to risk it. Because why would you? Why would you? Look, man, you've had 2 months. You got a lot of leeway. Can't figure out what's wrong. Guess what? More analysis is needed. Don't even try it. Don't even risk it. But Goalie, I can tend to say that Calypso will probably come down just fine. I really think it will. There's, like, the reason why is because, you know, they're worried about thruster blowout. If you're worried about thruster blowout, you don't just sit there and then let the capsule do its thing and be like, ah, it blew out, nothing we could have done. Change the duty cycle, change the trajectory. You can do that. You have the freedom to do that. You know why? Because the capsule's just sitting at the space station. Push a patch to this thing that doesn't have the duty cycle, that has a lower energy duty cycle on these thrusters, and it'll probably get home just fine. That's why I have such high confidence. There's no way they're not doing that, right? If you have a flat tire in a car and you're driving down the road and you can't stop for whatever reason, you don't put your foot to the floor. You let it off and you coast until you can find a place to stop, right? You're not just going to sit there and like, oh, my tire's delaminating. All right, whatever. Just keep going. Right? They're not stupid. They're just inexperienced. Floor it. Big toe, mister. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my analysis. I got a little rowdy at the end. I apologize. Sorry for swearing. I'm trying to get better at this. Like, sorry, those last couple of questions just... Okay. Right? But, yeah, I'm trying to be better. I hope you use this to learn something, to understand context, and most importantly, hold me accountable to these answers. You tell, like, how many streamers out there are going to ask their chat to tell them when they're wrong? Most of the time that just happens anyway, but I'm asking you to do that. I want to get better at technical analysis. I do not want to sit and play games about he said, she said. It's a Boeing management problem. I don't care about that. I care about spacecraft design. That's what's important to me, and I think that's the best teaching tool here. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to what Steve Stitch said. Data. It's all about the data. It's not, and Ken Bowersox too. It's not about what you think. It's about the data and reviewing the data. And if you can't review the data sufficiently to make a good decision, you go with the safe one because you don't guess in space flight, especially during a mission. So, I hope you enjoyed the analysis. The next stream will be Monday at noontime, where we'll go mess with our cool hinge part in KSP. Flame Trench, obviously, next Friday. Yeah, I should be around for it. But yeah, streams will resume on Monday. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. Yeah, the thrusters, no good. Remember that, guys. Sometimes the universe tries to tell you things, or in this case, physics. Sometimes physics is trying to tell you something, and you'd be wise to heed that advice. It's just hard to know when it's trying to tell you something. You know, you don't recognize it when it spits on your shoes. Follow your heart, kid. Never go wrong. That's a good movie. It's a good movie. You know what I'm talking about. It's one of my favorite movies. Anyway. Oh, the Polaris mission. The Polaris is on Tuesdays, Isaac. They moved it back one day. Yep. They moved it back, as far as I can tell. Give me 1 second. Let me just double check. They moved it back for additional mission assurance, meaning they're not ready. Polaris Dawn is currently scheduled for Tuesday, August 27th. This is tentative. Could change. Tuesday, August 27th at 3:38 a.m. And yes, I will be here for that. I'm not missing that. The Polaris Dawn mission is going to be amazing. And then right before that, there's a Starlink. Oh, they freaking would. They would do that. And then we do have a Starlink 9.5, brother, at 2:51 a.m. Fat chance I'm going to be there for that, but I'll, we'll see. Anyway, guys, I got to go mow the lawn, and then I'm going to the beach. Summer's almost over. I'm using that beach time, man. Sorry, I'm going to go sit on a beach and do nothing. Let my brain rest. Yep. All right, guys. Human Person, thank you for the 57-month resub. I do appreciate it. I'll see you guys all on Monday, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend. Go outside. Trust me, it's just sunlight. It won't hurt you. It's good for you. I know. That's what I'm doing. Mr. Streamerman's doing that. Get off the internet. I'll see you on Monday. Thank you.